The doors burst open and 110 pounds of military muscle hit the floor running. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, scarred across the left shoulder, teeth exposed, eyes wild with something beyond aggression. It was the look of an animal that had been hurting for so long that pain had become its only language. The handler, a decorated Special Forces sergeant with a shattered wrist brace, was being dragged across the polished tile of Crestwood Animal Trauma Center, like dead weight, shouting at everyone to stay back. Staff scattered. A technician knocked over a cart of instruments. The hospital director pressed herself against the wall and yelled for someone to call animal control. And then one woman stepped forward. She was nobody. That was what they all thought. Before we go any further, if this story already has you holding your breath, please subscribe to my channel and follow along to the very end. Hit like, leave a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning had started the way most mornings at Crestwood Animal Trauma Center started, with Maya Reyes being handed the jobs nobody else wanted. It was 6:47 a.m. when she clocked in, and the charge nurse at the front station, a compact, efficient woman named Darlene Forsyth, had already built a pile of assignments without looking up from her screen. Post-op vitals on the overnight boarding cases. Restock the surgical prep room after Dr. Alton's 4 a.m. emergency. Mop up the urine trail from examination bay 3 before the morning staff arrived and complained about the smell. Maya took the clipboard without a word. She had worked at Crestwood for 4 years. In those 4 years, she had watched 2 nurses get promoted above her, watched a technician fresh out of his certification program, get handed a senior caseload she had been quietly managing for 11 months, and watched the hospital director, Dr. Sandra Holt, deliver motivational speeches about the importance of every team member while looking directly through Maya as if she were a piece of furniture with a pulse. The place wasn't cruel. That was almost worse. Cruelty would have given her something clean to push against. What Crestwood gave her instead was a particular brand of institutional indifference that ground people down so slowly they stopped noticing it was happening. Nobody was deliberately unkind to Maya Reyes. They simply didn't think about her at all. She was 38 years old, 5'4", with dark hair she kept pulled back during shifts, and a face that rarely telegraphed what was happening behind it. She spoke precisely when she needed to and stayed quiet the rest of the time. The younger technicians sometimes made comments, not to her face usually, but in the break room where the walls were thin. She's been here forever, and she's still just a floor nurse. Some people just don't have the drive. That kind of thing. Maya had heard it. She let it sit where it fell. She was working through the boarding check, a greyhound recovering from a leg repair, 2 cats on post-surgical fluids, an elderly basset hound with a drain that needed changing, when the call came across the front desk radio at 8:12. A military working dog. Retired. Coming in via private vehicle, handler requesting emergency intake. The dog had been listed as aggressive, possibly in pain, no recent veterinary records on file. The front desk flagged it as a behavioral case and reached for the phone to call animal behavioral specialist, Dr. Marcus Vale. Dr. Vale was not in yet. He wouldn't be in until 9. Darlene asked if anyone wanted to prep an isolation bay. Nobody moved quickly. Maya set down her chart and walked to the intake area. She had already pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves by the time the double doors opened and the dog came through. He was a Belgian Malinois, which she registered immediately, not because of the breed placard on the intake form that a receptionist was fumbling to fill out, but because she knew the shape of the animal, the stance, the particular tension in the hindquarters that looked like aggression but wasn't, not entirely. His name was written on his worn tag, Titan. He was moving in short, compensating strides, the kind that looked like the front of the animal was trying to outrun the back. His teeth were showing. His handler, a man in his early 40s with a military bearing that 3 years out of service hadn't fully extinguished, had both hands wrapped around a thick nylon leash that was doing very little to slow the dog down. "Everybody clear the floor," the handler was shouting. His voice was controlled, trained, but underneath the training, she could hear the fraying. "He doesn't know this space. He's going to react. Someone get a vet out here right now." Staff scattered, the way staff always scattered when a large animal came in uncontrolled. A young technician named Brady practically vaulted the front counter. Darlene backed into the records room. 2 other nurses retreated toward the hallway, and one of them grabbed the phone to call Dr. Holt's office. Maya stood in the center of the room and did not move. She dropped her posture, not dramatically, just a degree or two, shoulders unlocked, weight shifted slightly back, chin down. She exhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate. She kept her eyes on the dog but unfocused them. Not a direct stare, not submission either. Something in between. She kept her hands open at her sides. Titan pulled hard twice more, then slowed. He looked at her. She waited. The handler was still calling out warnings, but his voice had shifted. There was a question in it now. He was watching the dog, not Maya. Titan took 3 steps forward, stopped, took one more, and pushed his broad head against Maya's open palm. The room went very quiet. "What the handler started. "He's not aggressive," Maya said, without raising her voice. Her hand moved carefully up the dog's jaw, checking the neck muscles, the lymph nodes, registering what she was feeling. "He's in pain. There's a difference." She crouched slowly, letting the dog's weight come against her shoulder. "What's his name? Official file name, not the call tag." The handler stared at her for a long second. He was still gripping the leash. "Titan, K9 designation TN7, retired last year. I'm Staff Sergeant Dale Pruitt, former. I've had him since his retirement. Something's been wrong for months. The VA vet cleared him twice, said it was behavioral." "It's not behavioral," Maya said. She was running her hands along the dog's flank now, down toward the hip, and when she reached the left hip socket, Titan made a sound. Not aggressive, not even fully pain, but the kind of low-pressured exhale that a stoic animal makes when it has been holding something unbearable for so long that even the careful touch of someone it trusts is almost too much. Maya sat back on her heels. "How long has he been walking like this?" "About 8 months? Maybe 9. "Has he been reluctant to lie down on his left side?" Pruitt blinked. "Yeah, he sleeps sitting up sometimes." "Does he flinch when you touch his lower back, left side?" "I thought he just didn't like being touched there." Maya stood up. "He has a fracture. Left hip. Based on the muscle compensation I'm seeing and the way he's loading his front quarters, it's been there for a while. Possibly since before he retired." She looked at Pruitt directly. "The VA vet missed it, twice." Pruitt's jaw tightened. "Are you a doctor?" "I'm a nurse." "And you're telling me his hip is fractured. I'm telling you we need radiographs immediately to confirm what I'm telling you." She didn't soften it or hedge it. "But yes, that's what I'm telling you." Before Pruitt could respond, the double doors at the back of the room opened and Dr. Sandra Holt walked in. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s with silver hair and a manner that occupied rooms efficiently. She had the kind of institutional authority that came from running a place long enough that the building itself seemed to defer to her. Her eyes swept the intake area, the scattered staff, the dog pressed against the floor nurse, the military man with his leash, and settled on Maya with an expression that was less surprise than mild inconvenience. "Maya." She said it the way you'd say the name of a piece of furniture you'd nearly tripped over. "What's the status?" "Possible hip fracture on the K9. I was just recommending radiographs." Dr. Holt looked at Titan, then at Pruitt. "Staff Sergeant." "Former," Pruitt said. "My apologies." "Mr. Pruitt." She moved forward, taking the spatial authority of the room the way she always did. "I'm Dr. Sandra Holt, Hospital Director and Chief of Surgical Services. Let's get your animal into an examination bay and I'll have one of our veterinarians take a look." She said he has a hip fracture. "She's our intake nurse," Dr. Holt said. The framing of it was so smooth and so precise that it almost didn't register as a dismissal. Almost. "We'll get a proper evaluation started. Maya, can you prep Bay 2 and then get back to your boarding rounds? The Basset in B6 needs his drain changed." Maya looked at Titan. The dog was still partially leaning against her leg. "I'd like to stay with the animal during the initial exam," she said. "He's calm with me right now and the transition will be smoother." Dr. Holt paused. It was the half-second pause of someone recalibrating. "I appreciate that, but Dr. Vale will be in shortly, and he's certified in behavioral management. We'll be fine." She smiled, the efficient, final kind. "The drain, Maya." Titan pressed harder against Maya's leg as she began to move away. She reached down once, quickly, and pressed 2 fingers behind his left ear. A specific pressure point, the kind of thing you learned in a specific context that had nothing to do with 4 years at an animal hospital in Crestwood, Oregon. The dog's breathing slowed. He let her go. She walked toward the hallway without looking back. Behind her, She heard Dr. Holt begin the intake protocol in her efficient, practiced voice, and she heard Pruitt answering questions in the clipped, cooperative tone of a man who had spent his life following institutional processes even when they frustrated him. Maya changed the Bassett's drain. She restocked the surgical prep room. She did the vitals. She did everything on the clipboard. At 9:43, she heard the raised voices from Bay 2. She was passing the door when she caught the word fracture, not from Dr. Holt, but from Dr. Vale, and his tone was the reluctant tone of someone confirming something they hadn't found themselves. She stopped. Through the small window in the door, she could see the radiograph already up on the illumination board, and she could see the break in the femoral neck, exactly where she said it would be. Dr. Vale was explaining it to Pruitt with the careful, considered language of a professional who was trying to appear unsurprised. Dr. Holt was standing to the side, arms folded. She did not look toward the window. Maya kept walking. She was at the pharmacy cabinet pulling post-op medications for the Greyhound when Darlene appeared in the doorway. The charge nurse had an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite achieving it. "Dr. Holt wants to see you after your shift," Darlene said. "Okay." She said, "I'm just relaying this." She said she wants to discuss appropriate scope of practice boundaries with you. Maya closed the cabinet. "Understood." Darlene lingered a second. There was something in her face that Maya didn't quite read. Not sympathy, but not entirely the other thing either. "The military man is asking for you. He's been asking since the radiographs came back. Tell him I'll be there when my rounds are done." She finished her rounds. Dale Pruitt was waiting outside Bay 2 when she came around the corner, and he had the stance of a man who had been waiting with intention rather than patience. He was about 6 feet, lean, with the kind of face that had been weathered by something more than weather. "I owe you an apology," he said immediately. "You don't," Maya said. "I questioned your assessment. You had every reason to. You just dragged a 110-pound dog through a door, and a nurse you'd never met told you what was wrong. Questioning that is rational." She pulled out her chart pad. "Has Dr. Vale spoken to you about the surgical plan?" "He has. Surgery is scheduled for day after tomorrow. They want to do he said a femoral head ostectomy. Is that right?" "It's one option. Depends on the age and condition of the joint surface. They'll know more once they're in there." Pruitt nodded. He was watching her with the evaluating attention of someone trained to read people and currently very focused on doing it. "Where did you train?" he asked. "Oregon State Veterinary Nursing Program." "Before that." She looked up from the chart. "You calmed a reactive military working dog using contact pressure and posture adjustment in under 2 minutes, he said. "Oregon State doesn't teach that." "I know, because my unit used to coordinate with the civilian vets who trained service animals, and there was a specific gap in the curriculum that we complained about for years." He paused. "So, before Oregon State." Maya put the chart pad under her arm. "I worked with animals before I went back to school." "What kind of animals?" "The kind that didn't have civilian equivalents." She said it without drama. "I should get back to my patients." "Sergeant Reyes," Pruitt said. She stopped. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights ran overhead the way they always did, indifferent. Down the hall, the intercom called a name she didn't recognize. She turned around slowly. Pruitt's expression had changed. The careful, cooperative civilian mask had thinned, and what was beneath it was something she recognized. The specific seriousness of someone who had spent time operating in contexts where seriousness was the baseline condition. "I ran your name while I was waiting," he said quietly. "I have contacts. Some of them still active." He paused. "There are 2 Maya Reyes in the Oregon Veterinary Nursing System. The second one's file is 6 years old and stops abruptly, and before that file there's nothing. Nothing public anyway. A friend of mine with a clearance level I can't discuss ran a secondary search and hit a hard wall." He looked at her steadily. "The kind of wall you don't hit for civilian medical professionals." The intercom called another name. A door opened somewhere and closed. "I'm just a nurse," Maya said. "I think you're a lot more than that." He wasn't being aggressive. He was being precise. "I think whatever you were doing before you became a nurse, it involved military working dogs. And I think whatever happened to Titan's records, the 2 clearances that missed a hip fracture that any halfway attentive examiner should have caught, I think that's not an accident, and I think you recognized it the moment you put your hands on him." He held her gaze. "Am I wrong?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. Get some rest, Mr. Pruitt, she said. Titan's surgery is in 2 days. She walked away. She walked all the way to the end of the hallway, around the corner, and into the small utility room where the mop equipment was kept. And she stood there in the dark with her hand pressed flat against the metal shelving until her breathing was fully controlled. Pruitt's words were still hanging in the air in a way she hadn't expected anything to hang in a very long time. 2 clearances that missed a hip fracture. She had thought the same thing the moment she felt Titan's hip. The thought had been clean and cold and immediate, the way certain thoughts only came when they were attached to something you already knew. Not a fracture that developed slowly. The calcification pattern around the femoral neck. The degree of muscle atrophy on the left side. The specific behavioral compensation that the VA vets had labeled aggression. Those weren't the signs of an 8-month injury. That was a fracture that had been present for closer to 2 years, possibly longer, and 2 separate military veterinarians had cleared the animal. She straightened up, turned the utility room light on, looked at herself in the small mirror above the industrial sink. She looked like what she looked like. A nurse in stained scrubs at the end of a long shift, dark circles, hair escaping the tie at the back of her neck. She had built this life very carefully. She was not going to let one dog unravel it. But even as she thought it, she felt the specific internal friction of someone trying to talk themselves out of something they had already decided. She went back to work. The afternoon shifted hard at 2:15 when a woman Maya had never seen arrived at the front desk. Mid-40s, dark blazer, the kind of posture you didn't learn in an office. She had a badge on a lanyard that she kept turned inward, and a briefcase she set on the counter with deliberate placement. She asked for the intake records on Titan, designation TN7. The receptionist looked uncertain and went to get Darlene. Maya was crossing the lobby on her way to the staff room when she slowed without quite stopping. She took in the woman's shoes, flat-soled, practical, slightly worn at the heel from standing. The badge lanyard was federal issue, not state. The briefcase was locked with a combination she hadn't set carelessly. It had the secondary scratch marks around the dial of something that got opened in a lot of different places. Darlene came out and directed the woman to wait for Dr. Holt. Maya continued to the staff room, poured herself a coffee she didn't taste, and sat with her hands around the cup, thinking about the fact that a federal agent had just walked into a veterinary trauma center asking specifically for the records of a retired military K-9 whose VA clearances had been falsified. Because that was what she was thinking. Not suspecting. Thinking. She had seen falsified military veterinary records before. She had done more than see them. She was still sitting there when Brady appeared in the doorway looking agitated. "There's a federal investigator out front," he said, in the voice of someone for whom this was the most exciting thing that had happened in months. "She says she's looking into some kind of military animal welfare case. Dr. Holt is losing her mind in her office." "Tell Dr. Holt that the investigator is going to need Titan's intake records from today, including the radiographs," Maya said. Brady blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because if she drove here instead of calling, she's already past the stage where records can be formally requested. She needs them immediately." Maya stood up, rinsed her cup. "Make sure the radiograph files are properly labeled with the timestamps. The timestamps matter." She walked back out to the floor. At 4 p.m., Dr. Holt called her into the office as promised. The conversation about scope of practice took 9 minutes and covered 3 main points. That Maya had overstepped by delivering a preliminary diagnosis to a client, that the correct procedure was to bring unusual cases to the attending veterinarian rather than speaking directly to the animal's owner, and that repeated boundary violations would need to be addressed formally. Maya listened to all of it without interrupting. "I want to be clear that I understand the instinct," Dr. Holt said, with the particular magnanimity of someone who had already won. "You saw an animal in distress and you responded. That's admirable. But this is a hospital with protocols, and protocols exist for a reason." "Of course," Maya said. "I want this to be a learning moment rather than a disciplinary one." "I appreciate that." Dr. Holt looked at her for a moment with the slightly searching expression of someone who couldn't quite tell if she was being agreed with or managed. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" "The federal investigator," Maya said. "Has she indicated what case she's working on?" Dr. Holt's expression cooled by about 3 degrees. "That's not something I can discuss with floor staff." "Of course," Maya said again. "Thank you for your time." She went home at 5:30, took the longer route, stopped at the grocery store for things she didn't need, paid cash, and watched the parking lot from the window by the bread aisle for 4 minutes before she left. She was being careful. She had been careful for 6 years. Careful was the mechanism by which she existed. At home, a rented house on the east side of Crestwood with a yard that backed up against a drainage easement and a second-floor window with a clear sightline to the street. She made food she didn't taste and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold. On the table in front of her was a locked metal case. It had been in the bottom of her closet for 4 years, inside a larger duffel bag, behind a collection of old textbooks she had never opened. She had moved it 3 times across 2 states. She had never opened it in Crestwood. She opened it now. Inside was a hard drive, 2 sealed manila envelopes, a photograph she didn't look at, and a folded piece of paper with a handwritten list of names. She stared at the list for a long time. Then she closed the case, locked it, and put it back. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, area code she'd never had reason to memorize. She let it ring. When it went to voicemail, the caller didn't leave a message. She sat very still in her kitchen. Somewhere in a recovery bay at Crestwood Animal Trauma Center, a military working dog named Titan was sleeping for the first time in months without the specific tension of an animal that has learned to sleep lightly, because lying down wrong means waking up in blinding pain. Someone had finally found what was broken. Someone had finally said it out loud. Maya picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized and never used. It rang twice. A man's voice answered. No greeting, just, "I wondered when you'd call." "Someone walked into Crestwood today," she said. "Federal badge. She was asking about a military K-9 intake. His records are wrong. The clearances are wrong. And she knew to come here before we'd even submitted paperwork." Silence. "Maya," the man said, and his voice had the weight of someone choosing their next words with the precision of a surgeon. "There's something you need to know about that dog's case file." She gripped the phone tighter. "His injuries were documented," he said, 14 months ago, by a different examiner, and those records were removed from the military veterinary database 2 weeks after the examination was completed. The kitchen was very quiet. "Who removed them?" she asked. The pause before he answered was exactly 1 second too long. "The same person who removed yours." The name landed in the quiet kitchen and didn't echo so much as sink. Maya set the phone down on the table without ending the call. She could hear the man on the other end still breathing. Not waiting, exactly, but present in the way that people who had operated in high-stakes environments stayed present, steady, and undemanding, giving her the space to process without filling it with noise. She picked the phone back up. "Say that again," she said. "The same signature authorization that scrubbed your operational file in 2018 appears on the removal order for Titan's examination records 14 months ago." His name was Garrett Osei, and she had known him for 11 years, which was long enough to know that he did not overstate things. He was not overstating now. "I noticed it 3 weeks ago when a colleague flagged an anomaly in the K-9 medical database. I didn't connect it to you until today, when your name appeared on an intake report that crossed my desk 40 minutes ago." "You're monitoring intake reports." "Someone at the federal level is monitoring military K-9 cases. I have peripheral visibility into that. When Titan's intake hit the system, it flagged automatically." Maya pressed her thumb into the corner of the table, a small physical point to anchor against. "The woman who came into Crestwood today, federal badge. Who is she?" "Her name is Investigator Donna Farrell. She works for the DoD Inspector General's office, specifically a unit that handles military contractor fraud cases." A pause. "She's been building something for about 7 months. I don't have the full picture, but Maya, she came to your hospital." Titan's hospital. Titan was cleared by 2 VA veterinarians. Both of them are employed on a consulting basis by a private contractor called Meridian Animal Health Services. Meridian holds the federal contract for military K-9 medical evaluations across 4 western states. Another pause, heavier this time. "That contractor has been under informal scrutiny for about 2 years. Nothing formal, nothing prosecutable yet." Maya sat back in her chair. The teacup was still in front of her, cold, the surface of the liquid perfectly still. "The person who cleared my file in 2018, she said. "Is he connected to Meridian?" Garrett didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. "I think you know I can't answer that on this line. Then I think you've already answered it. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Then she went upstairs, pulled the locked metal case out of the closet, and this time she didn't just open it. She took everything out and spread it on the bed and looked at it the way you look at something you have been deliberately not looking at for a long time. The hard drive was a standard encrypted model, 5 years old. The 2 manila envelopes were sealed with evidence tape that she had placed herself, dated, and initialed. The photograph she turned face down without looking at it. The list of names she read carefully, top to bottom, the way she had written it, in order of rank, not importance, which she'd done because rank was legible and importance was a judgment call. She hadn't trusted herself to make objectively at the time. There were 9 names on the list. She recognized all of them. 3 of them she had not thought about in years because thinking about them was the kind of thing that had a physical cost. She had learned to budget carefully. The other 6 she had thought about often, in the specific, dry way that you think about something that is unresolved, not with feeling, but with the persistent low attention of someone waiting for a situation to move. She looked at the list for a long time. Then she resealed it in the envelope, packed everything back in the case, and locked it. She put it under the bed instead of back in the closet. That was the only change she made. She went to sleep with the light on, which she hadn't done in about 3 years. She arrived at Crestwood at 6:30 the next morning, 30 minutes before her shift started, and went directly to the recovery ward. Titan was in an isolated bay at the end of the row, a decision that Dr. Holt had made for liability reasons, and that Maya thought was probably also the right medical decision, though she doubted the 2 reasons had much overlap in Dr. Holt's mind. The dog was awake. He was lying on a padded mat with his legs extended, and when Maya came through the door, he raised his head and his ears moved forward in the specific way that animals oriented to someone they had decided was safe. Not enthusiastic, not needy, just attentive. "Hey," she said quietly. She crouched down and ran her hands along his neck and shoulder, working through a systematic assessment without making it look like one. Temperature was normal. Respiration was steady. The muscle tension through his hindquarters was high but not spiking, which meant the pain level was managed but present. The discharge from his left eye that she'd noted yesterday had cleared, which suggested the stress response was already coming down from yesterday's arrival. She was checking his lymph nodes when the bay door opened. It was Dale Pruitt. He had a cardboard coffee cup in each hand, and he held one out toward her with the slightly awkward efficiency of a man who had decided on a gesture and was committed to it. "I was here at 5, he said. "They wouldn't let me back until 6. "He's doing better than yesterday." She took the coffee because refusing it would have been unkind, and there was nothing wrong with the gesture. "His stress indicators are down. Surgery is still on for tomorrow morning." Pruitt crouched on the other side of Titan and put his hand flat on the dog's side. The dog's breathing slowed further. "He was never aggressive," Pruitt said. "It wasn't directed at her. He was looking at Titan. 6 years in service, 2 deployments, never a single reported behavioral incident. And then they retire him, and within 3 months the VA vets are calling him a behavioral risk." He paused. "I knew something was wrong. I kept bringing him in, and they kept telling me it was adjustment issues, PTSD equivalents in working dogs, the transition off active duty." His jaw tightened slightly. "I believed them longer than I should have." "You brought him in when something seemed wrong," Maya said. "Twice. And when their answers didn't match what you were seeing, you kept looking." She drank the coffee. It was decent. "That's not failure. He's been hurting for 2 years. There wasn't much to say to that, so she didn't say anything. They sat with the dog for a few minutes in the particular quiet of 2 people who didn't know each other well, but had landed in a space where social performance felt wrong. Titan breathed. The monitors recorded. "The investigator," Pruitt said eventually. "Farrell. She talked to me this morning early, before you got here." He glanced at Maya. "She asked me some questions about the veterinarians who cleared Titan, whether I'd had any contact with the contracting company, whether I knew anyone else whose retired K9 had been flagged as behavioral after clearance." He paused. "She asked if I'd had any contact with anyone connected to a 2018 military K9 fraud investigation." Maya kept her expression neutral. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I didn't know what she was talking about." He looked at her steadily. But then she mentioned a name as a reference point. She said this name had come up in connection with falsified military veterinary records, going back almost a decade, and that this person had reported the fraud at significant personal cost. He held her gaze. She didn't say where this person was now, but she asked if I knew anyone in the Crestwood area with a background in military K-9 medical assessment. The monitor beeped once, routine. "Mr. Pruitt," Maya said. "I told her I'd just met a very good nurse," he said simply. She looked at him. "I didn't give her your name. I didn't confirm or deny anything." He turned back to Titan. "But I think she already knows." Maya finished her coffee and stood up. "I need to start my shift." "Maya." He said her name with the directness of someone who had decided to say a thing and was saying it. "Whatever happened before, whatever you walked away from, it's finding you anyway. You know that." She looked at Titan one more time. "Take care of him," she said, and left. The morning ran fast. 2 surgeries in the OR suite, a critical overnight case that had stabilized but needed close monitoring, the usual cascade of treatments and assessments that filled a trauma center's morning hours. Maya moved through it with the efficiency of long practice, and she did the work well. She always did the work well, which was the particular invisibility of competence in an environment that had stopped expecting anything from you. At 10:15, Dr. Holt called a brief staff meeting in the main corridor. It was presented as an administrative update, which was the kind of framing that was technically accurate and substantively misleading. The real subject became clear when Dr. Holt mentioned, in her smooth, controlled register, that the hospital was cooperating with an inquiry from a federal oversight body, that all staff should feel free to answer any questions from investigators honestly and without concern, and that any questions about the nature of the inquiry should be directed to Dr. Holt's office. She made eye contact with 6 people during that meeting. Maya was not one of them. Brady leaned over to her after and whispered, "What do you think it's about?" With the barely suppressed excitement of someone who'd never been anywhere near real trouble and therefore found it appealing. "Animal Welfare Compliance Review," Maya said, which was both vague enough to be plausible and accurate enough not to be a lie. "They run them periodically for hospitals with military K-9 contracts." Brady looked mildly deflated. "Oh." She spent her lunch break in the parking lot, sitting in her car, not eating. She was thinking about the list of names. She was specifically thinking about one name near the bottom, not in terms of rank, where he appeared 6th, but in terms of importance, where he had always been first. Ethan Whitmore. She had not said his name aloud in 6 years. He had been a lieutenant colonel when she knew him, which meant by now he was either a full colonel or out of the military or both. She did not know which. She had made a deliberate point of not tracking him because tracking him was the kind of thing that made a person's careful life unstable. But Garrett had told her that the same authorization signature that had removed her file had removed Titan's examination records. She knew that signature. She had seen it on documents before. The formatting, the security classification notation, the specific placement of the date relative to the authorizing officer designation. She had looked at those documents enough times in the period before she left that the signature had become pattern recognition, the way certain things became if you studied them long enough with enough necessity attached. She sat in the parking lot until her lunch break was over, then went back inside. At 2 p.m., Investigator Donna Farrell walked into the staff break room where Maya was making coffee and said, "I've been looking for a moment to speak with you." She said it without preamble, without announcing herself, without any of the institutional warm-up that usually preceded uncomfortable conversations. Maya had already clocked her presence in the building twice that morning, once near the records room and once near the veterinary surgery schedule board. And she had been expecting this. "Okay," Maya said. Farrell was compact and direct in the way that people became when they'd spent years in environments that rewarded directness. She had short dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, a mouth that looked like it defaulted to neutral rather than pleasant, and eyes that were doing the kind of systematic information gathering that Maya recognized because she'd been trained to do it herself. "I want to be straightforward with you," Farrell said. "I'm not here on a fishing expedition. I have a case. It has specific targets and specific evidence gaps. Your name appeared in a database cross-reference 3 weeks ago, and what I found when I looked into you raised questions I'd like to ask you directly." Maya poured her coffee. "I'm a veterinary nurse. I've been at this hospital for 4 years. Before that, you were at Harmon Veterinary Associates in Medford for 18 months. Before that, you were enrolled in the Oregon State Veterinary Nursing Program. And before that, the file stops." Farrell held her gaze. A civilian file stopping that cleanly, at a specific date, usually means one of two things. Either the person changed their name and built a new identity to hide from something, or the person's prior history was classified and subsequently scrubbed from accessible databases. Which do you think it is? Maya asked. I think it's the second one. And I think the entity that scrubbed it had institutional authority to do so. And I think that same institutional authority has been used to protect a fraudulent military contractor operation for the better part of a decade. Farrell paused. The operation has a body count, Ms. Reyes. Not human casualties. Working dogs. Animals that were approved for active deployment despite documented injuries because the contractor was being paid per clearance and the vetting officer had a financial arrangement with the company. Her voice didn't change register. She was not performing outrage. She was just delivering facts, which was more effective. 11 confirmed animals, probably more. Some were killed in action under conditions that a proper medical clearance would have prevented. Others are in situations like Titan's. Maya's coffee was in her hand. She had not drunk any of it. What do you need from me? She said. Whatever you saved before they pushed you out. The break room felt very small. Down the hall, someone's phone rang and went to voicemail. I'd like to speak with my attorney before I say anything further, Maya said. That's your right. Absolutely. Farrell reached into her jacket pocket and put a card on the counter. I'll be at the Crestwood Civic Hotel until Friday. If you want to talk before then, I'm available at any hour. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Titan's surgery is tomorrow morning. I know that matters to you. It should go fine. Dr. Vale has done this procedure many times. She paused. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to find what was wrong with him. She left. Maya stood in the break room for a full minute, holding a cup of coffee that was getting cold. Then she went and did her job for the rest of the afternoon, and she did it well, because that was what she did. She did not call an attorney. She did not have an attorney, not in Crestwood. She had a number in a city 300 miles away, a woman she had spoken to twice in 6 years, both times in preparatory conversations that were essentially rehearsals for a scenario that had not yet arrived. She thought about calling that number and decided to wait until she knew more about the shape of what was actually happening. Instead, after her shift, she drove to a hardware store on the west side of town, purchased a new portable drive, and drove home. She spent 2 hours that evening making a careful encrypted copy of the contents of the hard drive in the metal case. One copy on the new drive, which she placed in a waterproof bag and put in the bottom of the kitchen cabinet behind the cast iron pan she never used. One copy uploaded to a server she had been maintaining under a name that was not hers, in a location that was not in this state. She'd built the server 2 years into her time in Crestwood, in the long, slow way of someone who was not doing it urgently, but who felt the need for a contingency that did not rely on physical materials she could only access in one place. She had uploaded the same files 3 times over those 2 years, each time re-encrypting with a new key, each time validating the integrity of the upload before she deleted the working files from her local machine. The documents themselves were not exciting to look at. They were medical records, authorization forms, procurement contracts, internal communications, and a series of examination reports. The kind of materials that were individually unremarkable and collectively damning. She had assembled them over a period of about 8 months, the last 8 months before she left, working carefully and very quietly, in the way that a person works when they know they are being watched and have not yet been caught but understand that caught is a matter of when. She had been caught before she finished, not with the documents. She had kept those separate from everything that was searchable, but with the investigation itself. Someone had told someone who had told someone, and the result had been a conversation in a conference room with 3 people whose ranks she would not document and whose names she was advised very clearly not to put in writing. The conversation had been polite. That was the detail she always remembered. Nobody had raised a voice. Nobody had made an explicit threat. She had simply been told, with great institutional courtesy, that her findings were inconsistent with the record, that her conduct had raised concerns about her judgment and professional suitability, and that there was an opportunity, a generous opportunity, for her to take a transitional separation, maintain her clearance at a dormant level, and rebuild her professional life in a civilian context. The alternative, they had implied without saying, involved an internal process that would take a long time and end in the same place, but with considerably more damage to her in transit. She had taken the opportunity. She had also kept the documents. They didn't know about the documents. She was confident of that because if they had known, the conversation in the conference room would not have been polite. She finished the backup at 11 p.m., shut down her laptop, and sat at the kitchen table in the specific quiet of a decision that hadn't been made yet, but was already made. Donna Farrell had a case. The case had specific targets and specific evidence gaps. The gap, Maya understood, was between what the investigators could observe about the contractor's operations and the internal documentation that connected those operations to the authorization chain, to the specific individuals who had provided cover and access and institutional protection to the fraud. What Maya had on that hard drive was the authorization chain. She had spent 6 years telling herself the documents were insurance, protection, a deterrent against anyone coming for her, because anyone who knew she had them would calculate the risk of coming for her as higher than the risk of leaving her alone. But the document that cleared her operational file in 2018 and the document that cleared Titan's examination records 14 months ago carried the same signature, which meant someone had decided the risk of leaving her alone was no longer manageable. She was in the kitchen thinking about this when her phone lit up. Not a call this time. A text from Garrett, from a number she'd never seen him use before. 2 words. Check news. She pulled up the local Crestwood newsfeed and didn't find anything. Expanded to statewide. Found it in the 4th article down, posted 40 minutes ago. A piece about a federal case announcement out of the Portland division of the DoD Inspector General's office. Formal language, the usual framing, an ongoing investigation into potential fraud and misconduct in a military services contracting operation, no specific company or individuals named pending judicial review. She scrolled to the end of the article. There was a quote from a DoD spokesperson confirming the investigation was active and that evidence gathering was in its final phases. Final phases. She put the phone face down on the table. Final phases meant Farrell wasn't on a fishing expedition. Final phases meant the case was nearly assembled. Final phases meant that whatever she had in that metal case could be the difference between a prosecution that succeeded and one that collapsed on the gap in the authorization chain, and that everyone who had ever signed their name on a falsification order knew it. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time, and when she did, she slept lightly, the way she had trained herself to sleep in other circumstances, attention half on, mind noting sounds and silences without quite surfacing. She was awake before her alarm. She dressed in the dark, made coffee, and sat at the table. At 5:40, she drove to the hospital. Titan's surgery was at 7. She scrubbed in. Nobody had authorized her to scrub in. Dr. Vale's surgical team was standard composition, 2 technicians and a monitoring nurse. But the monitoring nurse on the schedule was a woman named Petra Lund, who had called in sick at 5 a.m., and when Maya arrived at 6:15 and told the charge nurse on overnight that she would cover the monitoring position, the overnight charge nurse had simply looked relieved and added her name to the board. Dr. Vale arrived at 6:45, looked at the monitoring position, and said, "Reyes, good. He responded to you yesterday." "He did. Try to be where he can smell you when he's going under. It'll help." She positioned herself where Vale indicated. When the sedation began, she kept one hand near Titan's face, not touching, just present, and felt the precise moment when the animal's tension shifted from controlled wariness to the deep involuntary relaxation of unconsciousness. His breathing slowed and steadied under the anesthesia. She monitored every reading for the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. The surgery was technically complex. The fracture had produced secondary damage to the joint capsule, and there was significant scar tissue buildup that had to be carefully managed. Vale was methodical and quiet, and his technicians moved with the particular wordless coordination of people who had worked together long enough that communication was mostly gesture and positioning. Maya tracked the vitals with the sustained attention of someone who had been trained to do exactly this in environments where a monitoring failure had a different kind of consequence than a spike on a hospital chart. "An hour in," Vale said, without looking up. "The fracture pattern is unusual." "In what way?" Maya asked. "The primary fracture line is consistent with a high-impact event, but the secondary calcification, this buildup here," he indicated with his instrument without touching the site. "This is layered in a way that suggests the fracture existed before a significant impact, as if the bone was already structurally compromised." "It was," Maya said. Vale glanced up. "The hip had a pre-existing stress injury," she said. "The acute fracture happened on top of it. If you trace the fracture line to the posterior superior margin, you'll find where the original injury was. It's older. Vale looked at the site for a moment, then carefully redirected his instruments. A beat. Then, "You're right." He was quiet for another moment. "How did you know that?" "The muscle atrophy pattern was asymmetrical in a way that wasn't consistent with a single injury event," she said. "And the behavioral compensation Titan developed was too sophisticated. Animals adapt to chronic pain differently than acute injury. What I was seeing in his gait was adaptation, not acute guarding." Vale was quiet again. He continued working. 20 minutes later, he said, "You've worked trauma cases before." "Yes." "Military?" She kept her eyes on the monitor. He didn't ask again. The surgery finished at 9:47. Titan was moved to recovery, and Maya stayed through the initial emergence from anesthesia, keeping her presence consistent and steady as the dog surfaced. There was always a risk window in the first minutes of emergence, especially with a pain-sensitized animal, where disorientation could spike into panic. She spoke in low, even tones, the specific register that she knew worked, that she had learned worked in a context very different from this one. Titan came through clean. She was writing up her monitoring notes at 10:30 when Dr. Holt appeared at the door of the recovery bay. The hospital director looked at Maya at the monitoring station, at the notes, at the surgical post-op board where Maya's name appeared in the monitoring slot. "You're not assigned to this case," Dr. Holt said. "Petra Lund called in sick. I covered the monitoring position. You weren't cleared to scrub in on a surgical case." Dr. Vale approved it when he arrived. Holt looked at Vale's sign-off on the board. Her expression shifted the way expressions shifted when someone was recalculating a position they'd already committed to. "In the future," she said, "any schedule changes need to come through my office." "Of course," Maya said. Holt lingered in the doorway, looking at Titan. The dog was on his side, breathing slowly, one paw moving once in a small, involuntary reflex. His vitals were stable and steady on the board. 2 years of undiagnosed pain, and now he was on the other side of it, sedated, still, finally past the worst of it. "He came through well," Holt said, with a grudging admission in her voice. "He's strong," Maya said, "and whoever originally trained him did it right. He's got good stress response fundamentals." Holt left without another word. Maya finished her notes. At 11:15, Pruitt appeared in the recovery bay doorway, and the look on his face when he saw Titan's vitals on the board. Not relief exactly, but the specific unwinding of a tension that had been sustained so long it had started to feel like a natural state, was the kind of thing that didn't require commentary. "He's okay," Maya said. Pruitt sat down on the bench along the wall. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for about 10 seconds, which was not long, but was enough. Then he straightened up. "I've been running the timeline," he said. "If his hip was pre-injured before the acute fracture, and Vale thinks it was, that puts the original damage during his last deployment." "Yes." "Which means he was deployed with a pre-existing injury. The stress fracture would have been subtle on a standard radiograph, but a proper specialist exam with palpation assessment would have flagged it." "He had a specialist exam before deployment?" "Yes." Pruitt was looking at the dog. His jaw was tight. "Meridian Animal Health Services," he said. "They did his pre-deployment evaluation." Maya said nothing. The same company cleared him healthy for deployment with a hip that was already compromised. His voice was even. The evenness was the kind that came from effort. And then 18 months later, when he retired and I kept bringing him in because something was clearly wrong, the same company's veterinarians told me it was behavioral adjustment. "Mr. Pruitt, they had a financial incentive to clear him for deployment," he said, "and a financial incentive to avoid diagnosing a chronic injury they should have caught." He turned to look at her. "What I want to know is who authorized Meridian to do those evaluations, because a contract that size doesn't happen without significant sign-off." Maya met his eyes. "Someone is going to answer for this," he said, "whether it goes through the federal case Farrell is building or whether I have to find another way." He paused. "I would like it to go through the federal case. I think the right outcome involves the right kind of accountability. But for that to happen, I think Farrell needs something she doesn't have yet." "Why do you think I have it?" Maya asked. He looked at her with the steady, unevasive attention of someone who had spent years in situations where pretending not to know things was a different kind of danger than knowing them. "Because of the way you looked at that dog yesterday," he said, "before you ever touched him. You looked at him the way someone looks at something they recognize. Not just an injured animal, something specific, something that connected to something else." Maya was quiet for a moment. "If I had documentation," she said carefully, "it would need to be provided to investigators in a way that preserved its evidentiary integrity. And the person providing it would need protection. Not informal protection. Documented, formal, institutional protection." Pruitt nodded once. "Farrell can do that. I've spoken with her enough to believe that." "I haven't spoken with her enough." "Then speak with her more." Maya looked at Titan. His breathing was slow and steady. The monitor beeped its regular rhythm. He had been carrying this for 2 years, and nobody had seen it until now. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's more than you said this morning." He stood up. "I'll be here all day, and tomorrow, and however long it takes." He looked at the dog once more. "He trusted you the moment he saw you, and his instincts were always good." He left. Maya sat alone in the recovery bay with the sound of the monitor and the slow breathing of an animal that had finally been found. Her phone buzzed on the bench beside her. A text from Garrett, the same unfamiliar number as the night before. "Whitmore is in Oregon. Has been for 3 weeks. Portland." She stared at the text. Then she read it again. Portland was 90 minutes from Crestwood. She put the phone in her pocket and kept her eyes on the monitor and felt, in the specific unhurried way that certain kinds of clarity arrived, that the 6 years of careful distance she had maintained were not going to hold through the end of this week. 90 minutes was nothing. That was the problem. She had built her life around distance and duration. The assumption that the gap between who she was now and who she had been was measured in more than miles, that the years themselves were a kind of buffer, that 6 years of careful, quiet civilian existence had compounded into something structural. But Garrett's text had dissolved that assumption in 11 words. Whitmore was not in Virginia or Texas or at some overseas posting. He was in Portland, 90 minutes up the interstate, and he had been there for 3 weeks, which meant he had been there before Titan arrived at Crestwood, which meant his presence in Oregon was not coincidental. She drove home that evening and sat in her car in the driveway for 4 minutes before she went inside. The metal case was still under the bed where she'd left it. She didn't open it. She sat at the kitchen table and thought about the architecture of what she was looking at, laying it out the way she'd been trained to lay things out, not in terms of what she felt about it, but in terms of what it was. Meridian Animal Health Services held the federal contract for military canine medical evaluations across 4 western states. Meridian's veterinarians had cleared Titan for deployment with a pre-existing stress fracture in his hip. Those same veterinarians had subsequently evaluated Titan twice post-retirement and labeled his pain response as behavioral. The authorization chain for Meridian's contract, the specific approvals that had given a private company access to military canine medical assessment, ran through a set of signatures she had documented 8 years ago, before she had even understood what she was looking at. One of those signatures belonged to then Lieutenant Colonel Ethan Whitmore. The documents in her case didn't prove fraud in the prosecutorial sense, not by themselves. What they proved was a pattern of authorization that was either corrupt or incompetent, and the internal communications she had preserved made incompetence very difficult to argue. What they lacked, what Farrell's case presumably lacked, was a clean chain of custody from the original source documents to a witness who could testify to their provenance and authenticity. That was her. She was the chain of custody. She had assembled those documents herself in real time, while she was still operating inside the system. She could testify to where each document had come from, who had generated it, and what it had been used to authorize. Without that testimony, the documents were evidentiary orphans, potentially useful but legally precarious. With that testimony, they were a prosecution. She understood now why Farrell had come directly to her, rather than approaching through formal channels. Formal channels could be monitored, and if Whitmore was in Portland and had access to the same database flags that had sent Farrell to Crestwood, he already knew that Titan's intake had triggered something. He already knew the case was moving. The question was what he was going to do about it. She called Garrett at 9 p.m. "He's not here for a vacation," she said when he picked up. "No." Garrett's voice was flat. "I've been sitting on this for 12 hours trying to figure out how to frame it. He's in Portland on what the official record describes as a consulting arrangement with a private sector partner. He retired from the military 14 months ago. Full colonel, clean exit, commendation included. The consulting arrangement started 8 months ago. With whom? A logistics firm called Vantage Northwest, federally registered. On paper, they do transportation contracting for government agencies. In practice, they're a subsidiary, Maya said. They share a registered agent with 3 other companies, one of which has a corporate address that appears in Meridian's procurement filings from 2019. She absorbed this. He built a soft wall between himself and Meridian after he retired. One layer of separation, maybe enough for plausible deniability, maybe not. Depends on how good Farrell's forensic accounting is. A pause. Maya. The fact that he's here matters. It means he's watching the case in real time and he has assets close enough to respond. Respond how? I don't know. I want to say that clearly. I don't know. But I've been thinking about the sequence. The database flag on Titan's intake. Farrell showing up at Crestwood within hours, and Whitmore already being in state when it happened. Another pause. Someone may have told him the intake was going to happen before it did. She went still. Pruitt brought Titan in as an emergency, she said. He didn't have an appointment. He didn't call ahead. I know. So if Whitmore knew, then someone in the intake or scheduling system flagged it, or someone is running the same database monitor Farrell is running. He let that land. The DoD IG investigation is sealed, but the K9 medical database isn't exclusively IG territory. Other entities have legitimate access, including, she understood without him saying it, contractors who held K9 medical evaluation contracts, including Meridian. She stared at the wall of her kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. I'm going to meet with Farrell tomorrow, she said. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Okay. I need you to do something for me before then. The list of names I sent you in 2019. The contingency file. I need you to confirm it's still where I put it and that the encryption is intact. I'll check tonight. Thank you. She went to sleep earlier than the night before, but not by much. She texted Farrell at 6 a.m., available to meet, not at the hospital, somewhere neutral. The reply came in 4 minutes. Cascade Diner, 2 blocks east of the Civic Center. 8 a.m. Come alone. Maya had known the diner. She parked 2 streets away and walked, arriving 5 minutes early and spending those 5 minutes doing a circuit of the block that was not technically surveillance, but was not surveillance either. She had done it from habit, and the habit came from training, and the training, after 6 years, had attenuated to something below conscious direction. It just happened, the way certain physical reflexes happened. Farrell was already inside, in a corner booth with her back to the wall, facing the door. She had a coffee and a notepad and the unremarkable appearance of someone who had long ago stopped caring whether they looked remarkable. Maya slid in across from her. You came, Farrell said. I came to listen, not to commit to anything. That's fine. Farrell poured coffee from the carafe on the table. I'll tell you where the case is. Then you can decide. She was efficient and thorough, and she did not editorialize. The case, as she laid it out, had been building for 19 months. It had begun with an anomaly flagged by a DoD auditor in a routine procurement review, a statistical pattern in Meridian's K9 clearance records that showed a significantly higher than average clearance rate for animals evaluated in the months before contract renewal periods. The auditor had flagged it as a potential data artifact. Farrell's unit had looked closer. What they found, over the following months, was a pattern of evaluations that had been conducted by Meridian contracted veterinarians, signed off by a military authorization officer, and used to justify deployment or continued service for animals that subsequent independent evaluations had shown to be significantly impaired. 11 confirmed cases. Probably more. The animals that had been deployed in compromised conditions, 3 of them had died in circumstances that their handlers believed were influenced by their physical state. Nothing provable without the internal records. Nothing that tied back to the authorization chain without documentation that predated the fraud pattern and showed its origins. We have the statistical case, Farrell said. We have the outcome records. We have 2 veterinarians who are cooperating, Meridian contractors who got out of the company in 2021 and are willing to testify about internal pressure to clear animals that should have been flagged. What we don't have is the authorization origin. We don't have documentation showing who approved Meridian's contract access, who the contracting officer of record was for the initial procurement, and what relationship existed between that officer and the company at the time of the approval. She held Maya's gaze across the table. That gap is the reason this case hasn't gone to prosecution yet. The defense will argue the fraud was internal to Meridian, that the military authorization was conducted in good faith on falsified submissions and without documentation showing the authorization officer had prior knowledge of or financial relationship with the contractor. That argument has a real chance of working. The authorization officer, Maya said. Ethan Whitmore. Colonel, retired. She said the name without inflection. You know who he is? Yes. The database flag on your file is his signature. We've confirmed that. It took us 4 months to get that confirmation through a series of declassification requests that kept getting administratively delayed. She paused. Someone was watching those requests and slowing them down. We eventually found a workaround. She looked at Maya steadily. I need to know what you have, not what you might have, not what you could potentially provide, what you actually have right now. Maya wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Before I answer that, she said, I need to know 2 things. First, if I provide documentation and testimony, what protection looks like. We'll do our best. I need to know the specific mechanism. Formal cooperation agreement signed by the IG and the relevant U.S. Attorney's Office, providing material witness protection status, documented immunity for anything arising from your prior disclosure of classified materials in assembling the evidence, and a clean record amendment covering your 2018 separation. Farrell had this ready. She'd had it ready before Maya walked in. We've been preparing this for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Before Titan arrived. Before Maya's name appeared on any intake report. How did you find me? Maya asked. The 2 cooperating veterinarians. One of them mentioned that when she raised concerns internally in 2019, she was told by a supervisor that someone had already tried to go this route and it hadn't worked. That phrasing stuck with me. It implied a prior attempt that had been suppressed. I spent 4 months tracing it. Your name appeared in a cross-reference between the K9 medical database and a 2018 internal military investigation summary that was classified but not fully scrubbed. Someone missed a secondary reference in an attachment. 1 document. 11 years, and it came down to 1 document someone hadn't checked the attachments on. The second thing, Maya said, Whitmore's in Portland. He's been here 3 weeks. I need to know if Farrell's team knows that and what you're doing about it. Farrell didn't blink. We know. We've been monitoring his movement since he retired. His presence in Oregon is noted, and we have a working theory about why, which I won't share in full yet. But his proximity to this case at this stage is something we're taking seriously. A beat. It's also, frankly, one of the reasons I moved on this week rather than waiting. If he's here and he's watching the case, the window for a clean approach to you is shrinking. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have internal procurement communications from 2016 through 2018. I have authorization forms with Whitmore's signature approving Meridian's evaluation contract access. I have internal Meridian-adjacent communications that I obtained from a shared network drive during my final operational period. Communications that reference the authorization relationship explicitly. She paused. And I have a series of examination reports that I personally prepared during that period, reports that document the findings I made on K9 cases I assessed, findings that were subsequently altered in the official record. Farrell had stopped writing. She was looking at Maya directly. Those altered reports, she said, you have both versions, the originals and the altered record. Yes, that's the evidentiary piece we couldn't build, Farrell said, and for the first time her voice had something in it beneath the professional flatness. Not excitement, but the controlled recognition of a person who has been working towards something for a long time and has just felt it become real. The altered records are the link between Whitmore's authorization and Meridian's operational conduct. Without them, the defense can still argue Whitmore was deceived by falsified submissions. With them, we can show the falsification process itself had institutional cover. I know, Maya said. They looked at each other across the table. I'll have the cooperation agreement to you by 5 p.m. today, Farrell said. I can have the U.S. Attorney's rep on the phone within the hour to confirm the terms. She paused. There's one more thing you need to know. We received a filing yesterday from an attorney representing Ethan Whitmore. It's a preemptive credibility challenge, a formal letter to the IG's office claiming that any materials potentially attributed to a former military K-9 medical specialist named Maya Reyes are the product of a disgruntled former employee who was separated for conduct issues and has a documented history of making unsubstantiated fraud allegations. She said this with the level precision of someone delivering unwelcome news that must be delivered. He filed it yesterday, before Titan's surgery, before I met with you this morning. Maya felt the specific coldness of something anticipated arriving on schedule. He knew I was going to come to you, she said. He knew you were here. He's been watching for your reemergence since 2018. When Titan's intake flagged on the database, it triggered something. Farrell folded her hands on the table. He's trying to get ahead of your testimony by establishing a narrative about who you are before you can establish one yourself. It won't work if the documents are authenticated independently. It will slow things down. It will give defense attorneys grounds for motions. It will put your name and your history in front of a jury in the worst possible framing before they ever hear the substance. She held Maya's gaze. It's not a fatal blow, but it's damage, and we need to move faster than he's counting on. Maya sat back. The diner was filling up around them. A late breakfast crowd, people with nowhere urgent to be, the ordinary noise of an ordinary morning. Through the window she could see the street, cars moving, a woman walking a dog, the specific unremarkableness of a Tuesday in a mid-sized Oregon city. I'll have the documents to you by end of day, Maya said. Give me the cooperation agreement by noon and I'll sign it before I hand over anything. You'll have it. I want the formal record amendment in writing before the documents transfer. Not promised. Written. Agreed. Maya pushed back from the table. I'll be at the hospital until 4. You can reach me by text. She left the diner and walked back to her car by a different route than she'd come. Not because she expected anything, because the habit was there, and the habit was, she had long ago decided, not paranoia so much as calibrated caution, and calibrated caution had kept her intact for 6 years and was worth maintaining until it wasn't needed anymore. The cooperation agreement arrived at 11:47 a.m., sent to a secure email address she hadn't used in 2 years, which meant Farrell had done her homework on more than just the public record. Maya read it twice, identified 2 clauses that needed narrowing, sent back annotations, and received a revised version at 1:15 that addressed both. She printed it in the hospital's administrative wing. She'd had access for 4 years without anyone thinking about what that meant, signed it, photographed it, and sent the photograph to Garrett. At 2 p.m. she texted Farrell, signed, will deliver materials at 5:30, name a location. The response came in 2 minutes, Federal Building, 4th floor. I'll clear you in. She had 3 hours. She used them to finish her patient rounds, write up her afternoon charts, and do everything that needed to be done for the day, as if this were a day like any other day. She was good at that. She had been good at that for 6 years. At 3:45, she was checking Titan's post-op vitals when Pruitt appeared in the recovery bay doorway again. His expression was tighter than the morning, the controlled tightness of someone who had received news. Farrell called me an hour ago, he said. Okay. She told me you'd met this morning. She didn't tell me specifics. He looked at Titan, who was increasingly alert now, tracking movement in the bay with the returning attention of an animal coming back into itself. She asked me if I'd be willing to give a formal statement about the Meridian evaluations, the specific interactions I had with their veterinarians, the conversations where I raised concerns, what I was told. Will you? Already did. Gave it this afternoon, in writing. He paused. She also told me, and she framed this carefully, she said she was telling me only because it affected the security of the situation, that Whitmore's attorney had filed a preemptive credibility challenge today, and that they'd traced the filing time to this morning, about 2 hours after Titan's case hit the overnight news cycle. Maya looked up from the chart. The local news ran a brief on Titan, Pruitt said. Handler brings retired military K-9 to civilian vet. Dog had undiagnosed injury for 2 years. Human interest piece, very short, but it named Crestwood. It named the hospital. His jaw was tight. And about 90 minutes after that piece went live, someone from an unknown number called the hospital's main line and asked specifically whether a nurse named Maya Reyes had been involved in the case. The recovery bay was very quiet. The receptionist didn't give any information, Pruitt said. She said she referred the caller to Dr. Holt's office, and Dr. Holt's office didn't pick up. He looked at Maya. I'm telling you because I don't think you're in a situation where you can afford to have information withheld from you. She processed this quickly. The news piece was a vector she hadn't anticipated, a soft public mention that was traceable, that confirmed her involvement, that gave someone watching the case a clean avenue to verify her location without touching any secure database. Thank you, she said. What do you need? I need to be at the federal building at 5:30. After that, I need Titan to keep recovering. She looked at the dog. He was watching her with his alert, steady attention, the same attention he'd fixed on her when she stepped forward in the intake room 2 days ago. Whatever happens next, his part in this is finished. He did what he needed to do just by being here. Pruitt nodded once. She left the recovery bay at 4:15, went to her locker, retrieved the hard drive and both manila envelopes from the small locked compartment she'd been using as a secondary location for the past 18 hours, and put them in a plain canvas tote bag she used for groceries. She was passing the main corridor on her way out when she heard her name. Dr. Holt was standing outside her office, and the expression on her face was the specific expression of someone who had just received information and was managing their reaction to it. A moment, Dr. Holt said. Maya stopped. I received a call this afternoon, Holt said, from a legal representative who identified himself as acting on behalf of a retired military officer. He told me, she paused, selecting her words, that an employee of this hospital may be in possession of classified or sensitive military documents, and that any involvement of this hospital in the current federal investigation could expose the institution to significant liability. She held Maya's gaze. He suggested that the appropriate response would be to place the employee in question on administrative leave pending an internal review. Maya stood very still. I told him I would need to consult with our legal counsel before taking any personnel action, Holt said, and I will. She looked at the tote bag, then back at Maya. I want to be honest with you. I don't fully understand what I've been pulled into. But I'm not going to take personnel action based on a phone call from someone I've never met, acting for someone I don't know. She paused. Whatever is happening, I'd prefer it happened outside these walls. It will, Maya said. Are you in any danger? The question was unexpected. It came out with less administrative calculation than anything Dr. Holt had said to her in 4 years, which meant it was either sincere or a very good performance of sincerity. Maya looked at her for a moment. I don't think so, she said. Not physical danger. They want to suppress the case, not create a larger one. Holt nodded. Then she said something Maya did not expect. You were right about Titan, from the moment you looked at him, and I sent you to change a drain. She said it plainly, without dressing it up. It was not an apology exactly, but it was something adjacent to one. I was doing my job, Maya said. I'm going to continue doing it. She walked out. The afternoon was cooling into early evening, the light going amber-orange over the Crestwood skyline, and she drove to the federal building with the tote bag on the passenger seat and the cooperation agreement signed in her jacket pocket, and 6 years of careful distance behind her like something she had left on the road. Farrell met her in the 4th-floor lobby, cleared her through security, and led her to a conference room where 2 other people were already waiting. A woman introduced as the assistant U.S. attorney and a man introduced as a forensic analyst from the IG's technical unit. Maya set the tote bag on the table. She took out the hard drive. She took out the 2 manila envelopes. She broke the evidence tape on the first envelope herself, which felt like breaking something else, the seal on a period of her life that had been held closed for a very long time, and began to lay documents on the table, explaining each one, its origin, the context of its creation, the subsequent alteration or suppression she had observed. She spoke for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She was precise and thorough, and she did not editorialize, and she did not break once. At 8:15 p.m., the assistant U.S. attorney looked at the forensic analyst, and then at Farrell, and then at Maya, and said, "This is sufficient for an arrest warrant." Farrell's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Her expression changed, just fractionally, the smallest possible shift, but Maya had spent a long time learning to read very small shifts. "What is it?" Maya said. Farrell turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a text from a number listed in her contacts only as field. 3 words. He's not there. Maya stared at the text. "We had a team on Whitmore's Portland location," Farrell said quietly. He left the building 2 hours ago. We don't know where he is. The conference room was very still. He knew, Maya said. He knew I was coming here tonight. And somewhere in that stillness, behind the glass door of the fourth-floor conference room with her documents spread on the table and 6 years of carefully constructed distance finally, irrevocably gone, Maya's phone buzzed once in her jacket pocket. She took it out. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. No area code she knew. 6 words. You should have stayed disappeared, Maya. Maya read the text once, then set the phone face down on the conference table. Farrell was already on her feet, phone to her ear, speaking in the clipped shorthand of someone activating a protocol that had been pre-established for exactly this contingency. The assistant U.S. attorney, her name was Rourke, Lena Rourke, Maya had noted it when they were introduced, had her own phone out and was moving toward the door with the specific urgency of someone whose calm was professional rather than natural. The forensic analyst was photographing the documents on the table in rapid sequence, working through the pile with systematic speed. Maya sat still. She was thinking about the text. 6 words, no area code, sent to a number that was not publicly listed and that she had used for exactly 3 calls in the past 2 years. That number was not in any directory. It was not connected to her name. The only people who had it were Garrett, the attorney in Portland she'd spoken to twice, and the person she'd bought the SIM card from at a gas station outside Medford 3 years ago, who did not know her name, which meant the number had been obtained through means that required either significant technical resources or access to a network of people with significant technical resources. She picked the phone back up. She looked at the text again. You should have stayed disappeared, Maya. The phrasing was wrong for a threat. It was too familiar, too almost regretful. The kind of thing someone said when they wanted you to understand they knew you, rather than when they wanted you afraid. It was a message designed to tell her something about the messenger's reach, without telling her what came next. She forwarded the text to Garrett with a single line. Trace this if you can. Don't wait for me to follow up. Farrell came back into the room. We have 2 teams reorienting toward Whitmore's last known position. He left the building on foot at 6:14 p.m. We have him on external camera for 2 blocks and then he's in a blind spot. She looked at Maya. The text. Unknown number. Did you recognize the phrasing? Is that something he would write? I don't know how he writes, Maya said. I have documented communications from him, but they're all formal. Authorization language, procurement approvals. She paused. The phrasing feels like someone who wanted me to feel the personal dimension of it. Whether that's him or someone acting for him, I can't say. It's him, Rourke said from the doorway. She had come back in, was still holding her phone. We just pulled a cell tower ping from 2 minutes ago. The number that sent that text activated in the vicinity of the Crestwood Marriott. He's not in Portland. She looked at Maya steadily. He's here. The room was quiet for the length of 2 seconds. He was here before I came to this building, Maya said. Almost certainly. She worked through the sequence. Whitmore had left his Portland location at 6:14. The drive from Portland to Crestwood was 90 minutes on a clear evening. He could not have driven here after she arrived at the federal building. The timing didn't hold. He had left Portland hours before her 5:30 meeting, which meant he'd been moving before he knew for certain she was coming in tonight. He didn't follow me here, she said. He was already coming. We think so. Farrell pulled out her own chair and sat down, which was the first time she'd sat since the text came in. The sitting was deliberate, a signal to Maya that the immediate crisis response was in motion, and what was needed now was thinking rather than motion. The news piece about Titan named the hospital and your involvement. We think Whitmore assessed that as a trigger event and moved before confirming your next step. He's operating on prediction, not surveillance. He's predicting correctly, Maya said. He is, which tells me he knows you well enough to anticipate your decision-making. Farrell looked at her. How much overlap did you have with him during your operational period? Enough. He reviewed my work. I attended briefings he ran. We were never in close contact, but we were in the same institutional space for about 14 months. She paused. He knew what I was capable of. He knew how I operated. Then he knows you would make a move once the case became active near you, Farrell said. He's not here to stop the handover. If he'd wanted to do that, he had a window this afternoon and he didn't use it. He's here for something else. Rourke stepped fully back into the room. My read is the preemptive credibility filing this morning. He's not trying to suppress the evidence. He's trying to contaminate the witness. If he can demonstrate that Maya responded to his presence by acting erratically, leaving the hospital under irregular circumstances, meeting with investigators in ways that look paranoid or orchestrated, he builds the disgruntled former employee narrative with behavioral evidence rather than just allegation. Maya looked at the document still on the table. He wants me to run, she said. Or overreact, Rourke said. Either one. She thought about this. The text had been calibrated not for fear but for destabilization, to make her feel watched, to make her feel known, to make her second-guess the environment around her. It was the kind of psychological pressure that worked well on people who were already anxious. She was not precisely anxious. She was alert, which was a different physiological state, though from the outside it could look similar. Then I don't run, she said, and I don't react to the text publicly. We continue with the document transfer exactly as planned, and I go back to the hospital tomorrow morning and do my job. Farrell nodded slowly. That's the right call. It also means accepting that he's watching your movements and we can't immediately control that. Can your team pick him up tonight? We can try, but a voluntary interview requires him to agree, and he's not going to agree, and we don't yet have enough for a detention order. The arrest warrant is pending judicial sign-off, which will come through tomorrow morning. Tonight, our best asset is keeping the evidence transfer clean and documented and making sure everything is processed before his attorney can file any emergency motions. Then let's finish, Maya said. They finished. She spent another 40 minutes walking the forensic analyst through the authentication of each document, the metadata on the digital files, the provenance of the physical materials, the chain of custody from assembly to present. She was precise because precision was what the moment required, and also because she was, under everything else, angry in the specific quiet way she had been angry for 6 years. And precision was the form that anger took in her when it mattered. At 9:40 p.m., Rourke declared the evidentiary transfer complete and documented. The arrest warrant application goes to the federal magistrate first thing tomorrow, Rourke said. Given what we have, I'm expecting same-day approval. We'll execute as soon as it's signed. She paused. I want to be honest with you. Whitmore's attorney is good. There will be motions and challenges, and this will not be clean or fast. But the evidentiary foundation you've given us tonight is solid. I've worked with less and gotten convictions. What about Meridian? Maya asked. The company itself is a secondary target. The principals, the veterinarians who filed falsified reports, the contracting officers who approved payments for evaluations that weren't conducted to standard, those cases are further along than Whitmore's because they involve less classified material and cleaner financial trails. They'll likely plead. Rourke looked at her directly. Whitmore is the target who has been protected longest. Taking him down matters beyond this specific case. Maya signed the final transfer documentation, received her copies, and left the federal building at 10:15 p.m. The night air was cold in the particular way of Oregon evenings in early fall, with a dampness that came off the hills east of town and made the temperature feel lower than it was. She stood outside the entrance for a moment, not because she was hesitating, but because she was checking. The street, the parked cars, the sight lines from the building across the intersection, the two people visible on the sidewalk to the north. Nothing that warranted concern. She walked to her car. Her phone rang as she was unlocking it. Garrett. The text number, he said immediately. Prepaid, activated this evening, one use, already dark. But I pulled the tower data through a contact and it pinged 2 towers in sequence. One in the Crestwood Commercial District at 8:02 and one in the residential area east of downtown at 8:19. East of downtown. Her neighborhood was east of downtown. He was near my house, she said. The second ping is consistent with a vehicle in motion rather than a stationary position. He drove past, maybe, or through. I can't say he stopped. Garrett's voice was steady and carefully toned. Maya, your backup copies. The server is off-site. He can't reach it. The physical copy in the kitchen cabinet. She was already getting in the car. I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it, she said, and the tone of it closed the offer. She drove home taking a route that added 4 minutes and allowed her to approach the house from the east rather than the west, which gave her a view of the front from half a block away before she was close enough to be visible from the windows. The house looked the way it always looked, lights off. She'd left it dark. No vehicles she didn't recognize on the block. No one visible on the street. She parked one house down, watched for 2 minutes, then went in. The kitchen cabinet was undisturbed. The waterproof bag was where she'd left it, behind the cast iron pan. She took it out, checked the drive, and spent 10 minutes checking the rest of the house with the lights still off, using the streetlight that came through the windows. Nothing had been touched. She turned the lights on, sat at the kitchen table, and felt the adrenaline clearance that came after sustained alertness. The specific physical flatness of a body that had been running at high capacity and was now being told to stop. She made tea. She drank it this time. She was still at the table at midnight when the text from Rourke came through. Magistrate has been briefed on urgency basis. Warrant expected 8 a.m. Do not contact us before then. We'll reach you. She went to sleep. Well, at 6 a.m. she was at the hospital. The overnight charge nurse told her Titan had had a good night. Stable vitals, reduced pain indicators, had accepted water and a small amount of food at 4 a.m. Maya went to the recovery bay, checked him herself, found the report accurate. He was lying on his side this time, which he hadn't been able to do comfortably in months. His breathing was slow. He raised his head when she came in and dropped it again when she settled near him, which was the specific trust behavior of an animal that had decided proximity to a person was a net positive rather than something to assess. She sat with him for 20 minutes. At 7:15, she started her shift. She did the work. She did it well. She managed 2 post-op cases, coordinated with the overnight veterinarian on a critical intake that had come in at 3 a.m., restocked 2 supply areas, and was in the middle of a treatment room assessment when Darlene appeared in the doorway with an expression Maya had not seen on her face before. "There are federal agents in the lobby," Darlene said. 3 of them. They're asking for Dr. Holt. Maya checked the clock. 8:47 a.m. The warrant had come through. "Thank you," she said, and went back to her assessment. She heard the commotion from the lobby filter through the corridors. Not loud, not dramatic, but the kind of sustained directed activity that changed the acoustic texture of a building. She did not go to the lobby. She finished her assessment, wrote up her notes, moved to her next task. At 9:20, Dr. Holt appeared in the corridor where Maya was working and stood for a moment looking at her with an expression that had moved beyond inconvenience into something more complex. "Federal agents have taken an interest in our K-9 contractor relationship," Holt said carefully. "They've requested records going back 5 years. That will take a while to pull," Maya said. "Yes." Holt was quiet for a moment. "They also told me that an arrest has been made this morning in connection with the investigation. Someone in Portland." She paused. "They didn't tell me who." Maya kept her face neutral. "If there's anything you need from me in terms of the records I have access to, let me know." Holt looked at her for a long moment. Not the inconvenience look. Not the scene furniture look. Something that was trying to recalibrate 4 years of assumptions in real time, which was a lot to do in a hospital corridor on a Thursday morning. "Yes," Holt said. "All right." Maya's phone buzzed at 9:31. "Farrell. Warrant executed at 8:09 a.m. Whitmore taken into custody at the Crestwood Marriott. No resistance. He's being transported to Portland for processing. His attorney is already filing. It'll get loud today. Stay at work, stay visible, answer any press inquiries with no comment. Your cooperation status is protected, but your name will likely surface in the next 24 hours. She read it standing in the hallway outside the treatment rooms, then put the phone back in her pocket and went to check on the critical overnight intake. The animal, a shepherd mix, 3 years old, hit by a vehicle and brought in at 3 a.m., was stable but required close monitoring. She spent 40 minutes on the case, coordinating with the on-call vet, adjusting the fluid rate, managing the pain protocol. The work was absorbing in the way that good necessary work was absorbing, and for those 40 minutes she was fully present in it, and nothing else was competing for her attention. She was washing her hands afterward when Brady appeared at the sink beside her. "They arrested someone," he said, in the hushed tone of someone sharing information they felt was too significant for a normal voice. "I heard the agents talking in the lobby. A retired military officer, something to do with the K-9 case." "I heard," she said. Is that connected to Titan and to you?" She dried her hands. "You should probably focus on your caseload today, Brady." He blinked. "Right, yeah." He paused. For what it's worth, when you stepped forward for that dog on Monday, I thought you were crazy. I really did." He said it with the uncalculated honesty of someone who hadn't prepared what they were saying. "I've been thinking about it since. You just walked toward it." "He wasn't dangerous," she said. "He was hurting." She went back to work. At 11 a.m., the news broke publicly. She knew because her phone began receiving texts from Garrett and then from Farrell in rapid sequence, and because she could see Brady and two other technicians clustered around someone's phone screen at the end of the corridor. The texts told her that a major news outlet had picked up the arrest and that the DoD IG's office had issued a brief statement confirming an active investigation into military contracting fraud involving K-9 medical evaluations. The statement did not name her. The reporting did. By noon, 3 different news organizations had identified Maya Reyes as a former military K-9 medical specialist who had attempted to report fraud in 2018 and been forced out, and who had subsequently provided documentation to federal investigators that formed the basis of the arrest. The reporting was not entirely accurate in its details. It conflated some timeline elements, slightly mischaracterized her former role, and attributed one quote to her that she had never said to anyone. But the core of it was right. She found out about the reporting because Dr. Holt called her into the office at 12:15. Holt had her laptop open on the desk, a news article visible on the screen. She turned it so Maya could see it. Maya read the headline and the first 3 paragraphs. "Is this accurate?" Holt asked. "Mostly." Holt looked at her. Not with the directional authority of the hospital director managing a subordinate, something more leveled than that. "You've been here for 4 years," she said, "doing intake vitals and drain changes and post-op monitoring." "I have." "And before that?" "Before that I did similar work in a different context." Maya looked at her steadily. "The nursing skills transferred, the diagnostic skills transferred. The rest of it I set aside." Holt was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you say anything? When you were hired, when any of it was relevant?" "Because the relevance was a risk," Maya said, "and I had already paid a significant cost for being relevant once." That landed. She could see it land, watch Holt absorb the weight of what was implied. 4 years of institutional indifference to a person who had set aside a significant professional identity in order to survive the consequences of using it. The drain changes, the scope of practice conversation, all of it against that backdrop. "I underestimated you," Holt said, not dressing it up. "Most people did," Maya said. "It's not a unique failure." She said it without cruelty. It was simply accurate. Holt nodded slowly. "What do you need from this hospital going forward?" Maya thought about it. "For now, nothing. Let me do my job." "All right." She went back to the floor. At 2 p.m., Farrell called rather than texted. Her voice had the particular quality of someone delivering information they found significant. "Whitmore's attorney filed 3 motions this morning," she said. 2 were standard, bail, jurisdiction challenge. The third was an emergency motion to suppress the evidentiary materials on the grounds that they were obtained through unauthorized access to classified systems. She paused. The federal magistrate denied all 3. The suppression motion denial is the significant one. The judge reviewed the cooperation agreement, the authentication documentation, and the chain of custody records you provided last night, and ruled that the materials were legitimately obtained by a person with contemporaneous access during the period of their compilation and that the chain of custody had been preserved. Another pause. He specifically noted that the altered examination reports, your originals versus the falsified official versions, constituted the clearest evidence of deliberate institutional fraud he had seen presented in a military contracting case. Maya was standing at the nurse's station, chart in hand. "Whitmore talked," Farrell continued, and her voice shifted slightly. Not excitement, but the controlled register of someone reporting a development they'd hoped for but hadn't counted on. After the suppression motion was denied, his attorney asked for a recess. During the recess, Whitmore requested a meeting with the prosecution. He's been talking for the past 90 minutes. We don't have the full picture yet, but he's providing information on the Meridian principals, the company officers who ran the internal fraud operation. He's trying to trade. Will you take the trade? That's above my level to decide. My understanding is Rourke is inclined to let him talk and see what he provides, without committing to any reduction in his own exposure. A beat. He's not getting a walk, Maya. Whatever he gives us, he's still the person who authorized the contract access, who suppressed your report, who cleared your file to protect himself. Those charges are solid. The Meridian contractors, Maya said. The veterinarians who filed the falsified reports. 4 individuals, 3 have already been served with federal subpoenas. The 4th is cooperating voluntarily and has been since last week. Farrell paused. This is moving, Maya. It's moving the way cases move when the foundation is right. After she hung up, Maya stood at the nurse's station for a moment and felt something she did not immediately have a word for. Not relief. Relief implied the anxiety had been continuous, and she'd managed the anxiety into something more functional than that. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more like the specific feeling of a long-held posture finally being released. The particular tiredness and spaciousness that came when you'd been braced against something for so long that you'd forgotten you were bracing. She picked up her next chart. The afternoon moved with the rhythm of a hospital afternoon, fast in some sections, waiting in others. She managed her caseload, checked Titan again at 3 p.m., and found him standing for the first time since surgery, tentative but real, weight distributed across all 4 legs with Dale Pruitt crouched beside him, making sounds that were not quite words. She watched from the doorway for a moment and did not go in because the moment did not require her. At 4:15, her phone rang. Unknown number. Not the same number as the text. Different prefix, different pattern. She answered it. A man's voice. Measured, older, with the specific diction of someone who had spent decades in institutional environments. Ms. Reyes, my name is Warren Taft. I'm senior counsel for Ethan Whitmore. I'm calling as a professional courtesy. A courtesy, she said. My client has asked me to convey something to you. Not as a negotiating position, not as any kind of legal communication. He understands those channels are closed, as a personal statement. A pause. He wants you to know that he is aware of what he set in motion in 2018, and that the decision he made was not one he made without calculation. He believed at the time that the institutional costs of what you were uncovering outweighed the institutional costs of suppressing it. She said nothing. He was wrong, Taft said. He recognizes that now, or so he's telling me. I'll let you assess the sincerity of that yourself. Another pause. He also asked me to tell you that the number the text was sent from last night was not used by him. He did not send that text. The nurse's station was quiet around her. Someone walked past, oblivious. Then who did? She said. He doesn't know. And he's telling us the same thing he's telling you. He had people who worked for him who operated on their own initiative in ways he didn't always sanction. He's providing names. Taft paused once more. I'm not asking you to believe him. I'm conveying what he asked me to convey. He ended the call. Maya stood at the nurse's station and thought about the text. You should have stayed disappeared, Maya. 6 words from a number that the man who had the most motive to send it was now claiming he hadn't sent, which meant someone else had known her number. Someone else had known she was moving. Someone else had been watching the situation around Whitmore with enough access to react when the case began closing in. Someone who had not been arrested this morning. She pulled up Farrell's number and typed a text. Whitmore's attorney just called me. Claims Whitmore didn't send the text last night. Claims others operated independently. Says Whitmore is providing names. You need to know this. The response came in 40 seconds. I know. He told us the same thing 20 minutes ago. We're working it. Stay calm and stay put. She put the phone down. Stay calm and stay put. She was calm. She was putting nothing. At 5 p.m., the day shift ended and she signed her charts and went to her locker and sat on the bench in the empty locker room for 3 minutes, looking at the floor. Not at anything specific, just at the floor. There were scuff marks on the tile from years of shoes and equipment carts and the general movement of people doing necessary things. And she looked at those scuff marks and thought about the fact that she had walked this floor for 4 years, and in 4 years nobody in this building had known who she was. She had known who she was. That was what she'd told herself. That it was enough. She wasn't sure anymore that she'd believed it. She stood up, put on her jacket, and went back to the recovery ward to check Titan one final time before leaving. He was resting again, legs extended, monitoring board steady. Pruitt had gone home for a few hours at Farrell's recommendation. The investigator had apparently told him very directly that he needed sleep and that Titan would be fine. She checked every reading, made her notes, was turning to go when she noticed something she hadn't noticed in the morning. The secondary monitor, the one mounted on the wall above the primary board, which was usually cycling through the general ward status, had been switched to an input channel. Someone had connected a laptop to it, probably one of the technicians reviewing imaging earlier in the day, and had left the input active. On the screen, cycling through a news broadcast with the sound muted, was a still frame from a press conference that had apparently occurred in the early afternoon. She recognized the building in the background, the federal building on 4th. Rourke was at the podium, too far from the camera to read her expression, but with the composed posture of someone delivering a prepared statement. And in the corner of the frame, partly cut off, was a face she recognized. Not Rourke, not Farrell, not anyone from the investigation. A man in a gray jacket, standing at the edge of the press gathering, not facing the podium but facing a different direction, talking to someone just outside the camera's frame. She moved closer to the monitor. The image was not large and the camera angle was poor, and she had not seen this man in over 8 years, but some faces stayed in certain kinds of memory longer than others. His name was Roland Fisk. He had been Whitmore's deputy in 2016 and 2017. He had been in the room during the conference that had ended her operational career. He had been, in her documented understanding of the structure, the person who managed the relationship between Whitmore's authorization office and Meridian's contract representatives, not the signatory, not the face, but the connective tissue between them. Farrell had not mentioned his name. Not once. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the monitor screen, the frame still visible. Then she sent it to Farrell with 4 words. "Do you know this man?" The response took 3 minutes, long enough that Maya had time to feel the specific quality of a situation becoming more complicated in a direction she had not finished mapping. When Farrell's reply came, it was not a text. It was a call. "Where did you get that image?" Farrell's voice was flat and controlled in a way that was different from its usual flatness, tighter, more directed. "News broadcast, press conference this afternoon. He's standing at the edge of the crowd." Maya kept her voice level. "His name is Roland Fisk. He was Whitmore's deputy for operational contracting in 2016 and 2017. He's in my documentation. He appears in 3 of the internal communications as a point of contact between the authorization office and the Meridian representatives." A silence that lasted exactly long enough to be significant. "Roland Fisk was granted early retirement from the military in 2019, Farrell said. "He has not appeared in any aspect of this investigation. We have not flagged him as a subject or a witness." Another pause. "He should not have been at that press conference. That conference was announced publicly this morning, but the location was only specified 2 hours before it happened." "He knew where it was," Maya said. "Yes. And he's someone Whitmore is probably not going to give you," Maya said. "Because giving you Fisk means giving you the person who actually ran the operational layer of this. The person Whitmore is most exposed by. The person who would know things that could make Whitmore's cooperation look like damage control rather than genuine disclosure." The silence this time was longer. "Maya," Farrell said, "the text last night. The one Whitmore says he didn't send." "Yes." Fisk would have had access to the same database flags. He was at the contracting level. He had visibility into the K9 medical system through the Meridian relationship. If anyone outside Whitmore's immediate operation knew your number, it would be someone who had access to the same networks Meridian was using. She paused. "And if Fisk is watching this case from the outside, if he's been watching it longer than we knew, then he knew you were moving before Whitmore did." Maya stood in the recovery bay with the monitor cycling silently behind her, and Titan's breathing steady on the equipment board, and the photograph of Roland Fisk's face on her phone, and understood, with the cold specific clarity of something that had just become structurally complete, that the case was not finished in the way that this morning had suggested it was finished. Whitmore in custody was one thing, one significant, long overdue thing. But Fisk at the edge of that press conference, watching, present, and undetected, was a different problem entirely, and it was the problem that was going to determine whether the last 6 years of her life had actually ended, or whether they were simply entering a new phase that she had not yet had time to map. "I need everything you have on Fisk," she said. "Tonight." "I'll get you what I can," Farrell said. "Stay where you are until I call back." The line went quiet. Maya looked at the photograph on her phone. Roland Fisk, gray jacket, edge of the crowd, not watching the podium. Watching something else entirely. Farrell called back in 18 minutes. That was long enough for Maya to have left the recovery bay, walked to the staff room, poured water she didn't drink, and stood at the window looking at the parking lot while her mind worked the problem. The way it worked problems. Not spiraling, not catastrophizing, but methodically. The way you traced a fracture line on a radiograph, following the break to its origin. Roland Fisk had been at that press conference. He had known the location 2 hours after it was announced, which meant he had sources inside the operational perimeter of the investigation. Not classified sources, necessarily, just attentive ones, the kind of low-level access that came from knowing the right people in the right administrative positions. She had seen him work that way before. He had never been the person who signed anything or appeared on anything. He was the person who knew which door to use. When Farrell called, her voice had a different quality than it had carried for the past 3 days. Not the controlled professional flatness, not the urgency of active crisis management, but something more considered. The voice of someone who had spent 18 minutes reorienting. Roland Fisk retired in 2019 with a clean record, Farrell said. He's been working as an independent consultant in the defense logistics sector. Nothing that triggered any flags in our investigation, because we were looking at the authorization chain from Whitmore's position upward, not laterally. A pause. What you gave us last night, the internal communications, Fisk's name appears in 3 of them. I pulled them while we were talking. I don't know how I missed it. You were looking for the signature, Maya said. He never signed anything. Right. Farrell absorbed this. Whitmore signed, Fisk facilitated. And if Whitmore is now cooperating and Fisk knows it, Fisk is assessing his exposure, Maya said. That's what he was doing at the press conference. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to see, to gauge how far the public case had developed, what Rourke revealed, what she didn't reveal. He's calculating. Which means he hasn't run yet. He won't run. Running creates a record. Fisk doesn't create records. She turned away from the window. He'll look for a way to get ahead of it, position himself as peripheral, cooperative if necessary, ignorant of the criminal dimensions. The internal communications I gave you, are they specific enough to tie him to the Meridian relationship directly? 2 of them are. One is a scheduling communication that puts him in direct coordination with Meridian's contract manager on an evaluation timeline. The second references him by name in a context that strongly implies he knew the evaluation standards were being manipulated. Farrell paused. It's not as clean as what we have on Whitmore, but it's not nothing. With Whitmore's cooperation testimony, it could be enough. Whitmore will give him, Maya said. If he's actually cooperating, he has no reason to protect Fisk and every reason to hand him over. Fisk is his operational layer. Giving Fisk to you demonstrates the depth of Whitmore's cooperation and reduces his own culpability. That's our read, too. A beat. We're preparing a subpoena for Fisk's consulting records tonight. If he shows up on camera at tomorrow's proceedings, we'll have grounds to bring him in for formal questioning. Another pause, this one with a different weight. Maya, the text. We've been running the number through our technical unit for the last 40 minutes. The SIM was purchased with cash at a convenience store in Portland 6 days ago. 1 call made from it after the text to you, to a number registered to a property management company that lists a Crestwood address. She said the address. It was 2 blocks from the hospital. Maya went still. He's been here longer than we thought, she said. At least 6 days. He rented a unit under a corporate name we're now pulling. He was here before Whitmore arrived, before Titan's intake, before any of this became public. Farrell's voice was precise. He's been watching the situation develop from close range, which means he may have been watching you for some time before you were aware there was anything to watch. The staff room felt smaller than it usually did. Does he know I identified him from the broadcast? Maya asked. There's no way he could know that. You saw him on a monitor inside the hospital. The footage is from a news feed. It's not live. The broadcast ran 3 hours ago. He can't track your access to that information. Farrell paused. But he will calculate that the press conference increased his visibility. He'll move soon, one way or another. Then move faster than him, Maya said. You have his Crestwood address. You have the SIM connection. You have his name in my documentation. That's enough for a knock and talk tonight and a subpoena served simultaneously. A pause. That's aggressive. He's been 6 blocks from this hospital for 6 days. He sent a text to my private number telling me I should have stayed disappeared. She kept her voice level. Aggressive is appropriate. Farrell was quiet for 3 seconds. I'll make the call. Stay at the hospital until I confirm the team is in motion. Don't go home tonight until I clear it. Understood. She sat in the staff room until 7 p.m., doing nothing, which was harder than it sounded. At 7:08, Farrell texted, "Team at Fisk's Crestwood address. He's there. Subpoena served. Bringing him in for questioning, not arrest. Not yet. Stay put." At 8:15, "He's talking. Lawyer present, but Fisk is talking. Stand by." At 9:40, "Go home. Team will do a pass of your block before you arrive. You're clear." She drove home. A dark sedan did a slow pass of her street 30 seconds before she turned onto it, which she noted without acknowledging. She went inside, checked the house, made food that was hot and actual food rather than toast or crackers, and sat at the table and ate it slowly. Her phone rang at 10:30. "Garrett." "It's done," he said. "I heard through my contact. Fisk gave a full statement, 4 hours. He corroborated Whitmore's cooperation testimony and then exceeded it. He provided Meridian's internal communication chain, the financial arrangement between the company's principals and Whitmore's authorization office, and the specific mechanism by which examination reports were altered in the system. He also confirmed that the decision to scrub your 2018 file was made jointly by Whitmore and himself, with Fisk executing the technical removal while Whitmore provided the authorization." A pause. "He's trying to get in front of it before formal charges. His attorney is negotiating a cooperation arrangement. Whether they take it is Rourke's call." "The text," Maya said. "Did he admit to sending it?" "Yes." Garrett's voice was even. "He sent it from the Portland SIM after he tracked your number through Meridian's legacy access to the K9 medical database. Your number had been linked to your operational profile before the file was scrubbed, and the scrub wasn't complete on a secondary system. He knew you'd made contact with Farrell, and he was trying to destabilize you." A pause. "He told the investigators he thought you'd run." "I know," she said. "He didn't know you very well." "He knew me from a conference room in 2018, she said. "He knew a version of me that was 29 days from losing everything she'd built. He thought that was the whole picture." She heard Garrett exhale. Not a sigh, something quieter. "Are you all right?" "I'm tired," she said. "But yes." She slept for 8 hours straight, which she had not done in longer than she could precisely remember. The next weeks moved with the particular momentum of a process that had been built correctly and was now running under its own force. Maya went to work every morning. She did her job. She checked Titan daily and watched the specific incremental quality of an animal recovering. Not dramatically, not in clean upward lines, but in the ordinary messy way of real healing, where some days were better than the day before and some days weren't, and the trend was upward even when the daily picture was complicated. Pruitt was at the hospital most mornings. He and Maya had developed the kind of wordless functional ease that happened between people who had been through something together and had landed on the same side of it. He brought coffee sometimes. She updated him on Titan's progress in the precise clinical language she used for everything, which he had learned to hear as its own kind of fluency. "He walked the length of the ward yesterday," she told him on a Tuesday, 11 days after the surgery. "Unassisted, slow but correct gait pattern." Pruitt looked at the dog for a moment. "Correct gait. Loading all 4 limbs evenly. The left hip is holding." She paused. "He's going to be okay." He didn't say anything. He reached down and put his hand on Titan's head, and the dog leaned into it, and that was a complete sentence in a language that didn't need translation. The formal legal proceedings were neither fast nor cinematic. Rourke had warned her about that. Federal cases moved through their procedural stages with the grinding thoroughness of systems that had been designed to be resistant to rush, and Maya had to learn, in a new way, to be patient with a process that was technically working even when it felt static. Whitmore's arraignment was covered by 3 news outlets. His attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, which was expected, and the bail hearing produced a substantial bond with travel restrictions, which was also expected. The cooperation agreement meant the charges would be shaped around what he provided, but the foundational charges, fraud, obstruction, abuse of official authority, We're not going away regardless of cooperation. Rourke had been explicit about that. Fisk's case moved faster, which was the sometimes counterintuitive reality of cooperation agreements. The person who cooperated most fully and most quickly often faced the swiftest formal process because the evidentiary framework was the most complete. His cooperation agreement was finalized within 2 weeks of his questioning, and formal charges were filed the following day. Fraud, conspiracy, unauthorized manipulation of federal records. The federal records charge carried a significant sentencing enhancement that his attorney was negotiating against, with limited traction. The Meridian principals, 4 individuals, the company's president, and 3 senior veterinary contracting officers, were charged in a separate but coordinated action. 2 of them had cooperated voluntarily from early in the process. The other 2 retained aggressive counsel and mounted a defense that Rourke described to Maya in one of their periodic update calls as expensive and ultimately not promising. Maya's testimony was taken in a formal deposition setting, not in open court. The cooperation agreement structured her role as a material witness, and the evidentiary strength of the documentary record meant her in-court testimony was less central than it would have been if the documents had been weaker. She was deposed for 6 hours across 2 sessions. She answered every question precisely and without embellishment, and corrected the record twice when questioners, Whitmore's defense counsel, specifically, attempted to characterize events in ways that were technically possible readings, but not accurate ones. The defense counsel was skilled and persistent. He spent 40 minutes trying to establish that Maya's documentation had been assembled with adversarial intent rather than contemporaneous professional observation, which was the thread of the credibility challenge that had been filed before her arrest, still being pulled. She answered each question with the same composure, the same precision. When he asked whether her decision to retain documents after her separation had been driven by personal animosity toward the individuals she was reporting, she said, "I retained the documents because I believed the fraud I had observed was ongoing and would cause continued harm to animals in military service. The personal dimension of what happened to me in 2018 was secondary to that concern, though I won't pretend it was absent." He looked at her for a moment. "You held on to classified materials for 6 years, he said. "I held on to documentation of fraud for 6 years, she said. "The classification was applied to those materials retroactively and selectively, in ways that my cooperation agreement addresses. You have that filing." He moved on. After the second deposition session, Rourke walked her to the building's ground floor and said, "You were excellent in there." "I was accurate," Maya said. "In a deposition, those are the same thing." Rourke paused at the door. "I want you to know, I've handled a lot of cases where the key witness was someone who'd been pushed out of a system after trying to do the right thing. The push-out usually does something to people. It makes them eager in ways that create problems on the stand, or it makes them performatively indifferent, which is its own kind of problem." She looked at Maya. "You're neither. You're just present. It's unusual." "I had a long time to get used to what happened," Maya said. "I'm not performing anything." "I know. That's what makes it unusual." The formal record amendment came through on a Thursday morning in the form of a secure document delivered to the email address Farrell had used for all official communications. It was 7 pages, dense with procedural language, and what it said in substance was that Maya Reyes's 2018 separation from military service had been classified as involuntary and conducted under circumstances that did not reflect her professional conduct or record, and that her operational file was being restored to reflect her actual service history, which included commendations she had not known were part of her record because they'd been buried under the scrubbed material. She read the document at her kitchen table in the morning before her shift. She read it twice. Then she set it down, drank her coffee, and sat for a while in the particular quiet of something that had been wrong for 6 years being formally, officially, irrevocably corrected. It did not feel the way she had sometimes imagined it might feel. It didn't feel like vindication in any dramatic sense. It felt more like setting down something heavy that she'd been carrying for so long she'd adjusted her posture around the weight. She felt lighter a little, and tired in a new way, the way you felt tired after you'd put something down rather than while you were still holding it. She went to work. Darlene was at the front desk when she came in, and Darlene looked at her with the careful attention of someone who had been watching the news and recalibrating their understanding of the person they'd been working beside for 4 years. There was an awkwardness in it that Maya found neither satisfying nor uncomfortable. It was just what it was, the ordinary human difficulty of adjusting an assumption. "Morning," Maya said. "Morning," Darlene said, and then, "I pulled your last 3 performance reviews last week, out of curiosity." She paused. "You've never had anything below exceptional on clinical assessment, every single review." "I know," Maya said. "We never promoted you." "No." Darlene looked at the desk surface for a moment. I don't have anything good to say about that. I just wanted you to know I noticed it." Maya considered this. "I appreciate that," she said, and meant it without irony or performance, because acknowledgement from someone who had the ability to give it and chose to was worth something even when it came late. She started her shift. Dr. Holt called her into the office at 10 a.m. It was the 5th time Maya had been in that office since Monday, which was a marked change from the 4-year average of roughly once per quarter, and the meetings had been progressively less about administration and more about something less easily categorized. Holt had a folder on her desk. "I've been in contact with a consortium of military veterinary trauma hospitals," she said. 3 facilities, all in the Pacific Northwest, all under federal contracting review given the Meridian situation. They're looking at rebuilding their canine assessment protocols from the ground up, new standards, new training requirements, independent oversight structure. She opened the folder. They've asked this hospital to participate in the oversight committee. The committee would develop the new evaluation framework and train the veterinarians and specialist staff at all 3 facilities. She looked up. "I'd like to put your name forward as our representative, given your background and what's now on your official record." Maya looked at the folder. It was not an apology. Holt was not a person who operated in apologies. Maya had understood that for 4 years and still understood it. It was something more practical and in some ways more meaningful than an apology. It was the use of her, finally and correctly, in a role that matched what she actually was. "I'd want to be clear about my time commitment," Maya said. "My caseload here doesn't diminish." "Agreed." "And I'd want the oversight structure to include at minimum 1 independent veterinary specialist and 1 former military canine handler who isn't employed by any of the participating hospitals. The conflict of interest management has to be structural, not just policy." Holt made a note. "I'll take that to the consortium." "Then yes," Maya said. "Put my name forward." She went back to work. At noon, she ate lunch in the break room. Actual lunch, at the actual table, not on her feet between tasks. Brady was there, eating a sandwich and reading something on his phone, and he looked up when she came in with the slightly different quality of attention he'd been giving her since the news had broken. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to whether I say yes or not." He almost smiled. "When you stepped in front of that dog, Titan, the first morning, did you know it was going to work?" She put her food on the table and sat down. "I thought it would. I wasn't certain. But you stepped forward anyway. He wasn't going to hurt me. You didn't know that." "I assessed it as very likely," she said. "There's a difference between not knowing something with certainty and not knowing it at all." She paused. "He was in pain. An animal in pain moves differently than an animal that's aggressive by nature or training. The body language was wrong for pure aggression and right for pain response. I trusted the read." Brady thought about this. "And if you'd been wrong?" "Then I would have been wrong," she said. "But I would have made the decision based on what I actually observed rather than what scared me." He was quiet for a moment. I don't know if that's brave or just a really different way of thinking about risk." "Probably both," she said. The sentencing proceedings began 8 months after the arrest. They took 11 weeks to complete, moving through the Meridian principles first, and then to Fisk, and finally to Whitmore, each case shaped by its specific evidentiary record and cooperation history. The Meridian president received 7 years. The contracting officers drew sentences ranging from 18 months to 4 years, depending on cooperation and the specific scope of their involvement in the falsification chain. The 2 who had cooperated early received reductions that their attorneys had negotiated with reasonable skill. Fisk's sentencing was the one that the news covered most extensively, partly because his cooperation agreement had been extensively reported, and partly because the specifics of what he had done, the technical manipulation of federal records, the retroactive classification of Maya's file, the deployment of damaged animals into active service, had a concrete, graspable quality that translated to public understanding more cleanly than the abstract financial fraud at the heart of the contract manipulation. He received 9 years. His attorney immediately announced an appeal. Rourke told Maya, in a call that afternoon, that the appeal had limited grounds and she was not concerned about its outcome. Whitmore's sentencing was the last. He stood before the federal judge on a Tuesday in late November, 8 months and 12 days after Titan had been dragged through the doors of Crestwood Animal Trauma Center. His attorney delivered a lengthy statement about cooperation, about the complexity of institutional decision-making under pressure, about a career of genuine service that had ended badly. Whitmore himself made a statement, 2 minutes, read from a paper, in the measured, careful diction of a man who had spent months being coached on what to say and was saying it as accurately as he could while knowing it was insufficient. Maya was not in the courtroom. She had been given the option and had declined. Rourke had understood immediately. "You don't need to see it to know it happened," she had said, and Maya had said, "That's right." And that had been the end of it. She was at the hospital. She was doing the work. She found out about the sentence the way she found out about most things these days, from Farrell, by text, at 2:17 p.m. 12 years. No early release recommendation. All charges sustained. It's done, Maya. She was in the middle of changing a drain on a post-operative spaniel when the text came. She read it, put the phone back in her pocket, and finished the drain change. Then she wrote up her notes, washed her hands, and stood at the sink for a moment with the water running over her wrists, not because she needed to wash further, but because the cold water was a physical thing and the moment required something physical to anchor it. 12 years. For the man who had decided, in a conference room in 2018, with 3 other people and no formal record, that her assessment of a fraud was an institutional inconvenience, and that her career and her record and her identity as a professional were acceptable collateral damage in the management of that inconvenience. She turned the water off. She went to check on Titan. I was walking well by the time the sentencing came. More than walking. Pruitt had started taking him for short outdoor circuits in the hospital's rear yard, and the video he'd sent Maya 2 weeks earlier showed Titan moving at a controlled trot, head up, ears forward, the specific carriage of an animal that had recovered not just its physical function, but something less quantifiable, the readiness that lived underneath the physical, the orientation toward the world that pain had been suppressing for 2 years. He came back to the recovery ward for his final formal evaluation on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Whitmore's sentencing. Dr. Vale conducted the assessment. Maya stood to the side and watched, which was where she belonged in this particular clinical encounter, even though part of her was running a parallel evaluation that matched Vale's findings beat for beat and occasionally got there half a second faster. Vale signed the discharge paperwork at 10:45 a.m. "He's good," Vale said simply. "Full clearance. Whatever exercise regimen feels right, graduated from here." Pruitt was crouched beside Titan, and Titan was leaning into him in the way he'd learned to lean without the protective guarding of an animal. Managing pain. The full easy weight of an animal that was not expecting hurt. "Thank you," Pruitt said to Vale. Then he looked at Maya. She had expected something from herself in that moment. The completion of a circuit, some resolution of the specific tension that had been running since the morning. A dog had pulled a man across the intake floor and stopped in front of her as if she were the first solid thing he'd found. What she felt instead was quieter than that. Not less exactly, just different in texture. "He's strong," she said. "He always was. He just needed someone to find what was wrong." Pruitt stood up. He was a person who was not effusive, and she had never expected effusion from him. And what he gave her instead was something more considered. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Not on behalf of the case or the investigation or any of it. Just from me." He held her gaze directly. "What you did in 2018 when you were pushed out, you kept the documents. You kept them for 6 years, not knowing if they'd ever matter. You did that without anyone watching, without any guarantee." He paused. "That's the hardest kind of thing to do." "It was also the kind of thing that kept me from moving forward," she said honestly. "I don't want to make it sound cleaner than it was. Keeping those documents meant I never fully let go of what happened. It was insurance, and it was also a weight. Did you ever think about getting rid of them? Yes, multiple times. What stopped you? She looked at Titan. 11 animals, confirmed. Probably more. She paused. The documents were the only proof those cases weren't accidents. Pruitt nodded once. They stood together in the corridor for a moment, Titan between them, the hospital doing what hospitals did around them. The specific continuous motion of a place that ran on need and response. Where will you take him? She asked. Home, Pruitt said. He's been waiting to go home for a long time. She walked them to the entrance. She watched Pruitt hold the door, and Titan move through it with the deliberate confidence of an animal that had learned to trust its own weight again, and she stood in the doorway until the car at the end of the parking row had pulled out and was gone. Then she went back inside and did her job. The consortium's oversight committee met for the first time in January, 8 people around a conference table in a federal building in Portland, 3 hospital representatives, 2 independent veterinary specialists, 1 former military canine handler named Greta Halverson, who had 3 decades of service dog experience and opinions about institutional accountability that she delivered without softening, 1 DoD liaison, and Maya. The meeting lasted 4 hours and covered the foundational principles of the new evaluation framework. Maya spoke for approximately 40 minutes of those 4 hours, presenting a draft protocol she had spent 6 weeks building, and the arguments she made were specific and procedurally grounded and included 3 places where the current system had failed Titan specifically, not as emotional support, but as case study, because the failure modes were real and the new protocol needed to close them. Halverson, who sat across from Maya and had spent the first 30 minutes of the meeting assessing her with the frank evaluating attention of someone who had seen a lot of people perform competence and was calibrated to the difference between that and the real thing, said at the end of Maya's presentation. This is the first protocol I've seen in 20 years of this work that addresses the incentive misalignment problem at the contracting level rather than just the clinical level. She tapped the draft. Who wrote this? I did, Maya said. Before or after you were a floor nurse? Both, Maya said. The nursing years contributed more than you might expect. Halverson looked at her for a moment. How? Maya thought about how to answer that accurately. When you're invisible, she said, you see things that people with authority don't see. You're in rooms where people stop performing and just operate. You see the gap between how a system is supposed to work and how it actually works, because nobody is managing that gap for your benefit. She paused. I was a floor nurse for 6 years. I learned a lot about gaps. The table was quiet for a moment. The DoD liaison, a man in his 40s who had been largely procedural up to this point, said, that should probably be in the introductory document for the framework. Not necessarily in those words, but that principle. Systems need people who can see the gaps. I'll add a section, Maya said. The framework took 4 months to finalize. It was a living document, meaning it had a built-in review cycle, and the committee that oversaw it was structured to prevent the kind of single point of authorization failure that had made the Meridian fraud possible. Independent verification at multiple stages. Financial auditing external to the contracting chain. A reporting mechanism that routed directly to an oversight body rather than through the contractor's own administrative system. It was not a perfect document. Maya knew that because she had written most of it, and the imperfections were visible to her in the way that imperfections in your own work were always visible. But it was functional and specific, and addressed the actual failure modes rather than the theoretical ones. And when it went into effect across the 3 participating hospitals in May, the DoD liaison told her in a brief email that it was being reviewed for potential broader implementation across the Western Regional Network. She forwarded the email to Garrett with a 1-line message. It's going somewhere. His reply came in 6 minutes. It already went somewhere. 8 years ago, when you started writing it. She put the phone down and thought about that for a moment. He wasn't wrong, exactly. The framework's bones were in the documentation she had assembled before she left, in the pattern of failures she had cataloged and the corrective logic she had worked out while trying to build a reportable case that would be taken seriously. The case hadn't been taken seriously, but the framework had survived in the same box as the evidence, waiting with the same patient stubbornness for a moment when it would have somewhere to go. That was the part nobody saw. Not Rourke, not Farrell, not the news outlets that had run the story of the nurse who kept the documents. What they saw was the evidence and the testimony and the legal outcome. What they didn't see was the decade of disciplined private work that had made those things possible. The years of maintaining encrypted backups, of learning nursing so the clinical logic was current, of understanding the system well enough to document its failures accurately, even without institutional access to do so. You couldn't perform that. It wasn't the kind of thing that survived on commitment alone. It survived on something harder to name, a specific refusal to let the injustice become the only story. The documents were evidence of fraud, but they were also evidence of something else. The persistence of a person who had been told her account of reality was wrong, who had known it wasn't wrong, and who had carried the proof without knowing if the proof would ever find its use. It had found its use. She thought sometimes about what she would say to the version of herself that had sat in that conference room in 2018 and been told, with great institutional politeness, that she was finished. She couldn't go back and tell her anything. But if she could, she thought she would say, "The thing they are trying to take from you is not what they think it is. They think they're taking your career, your record, your identity in the system. What they can't take is the knowledge. What you know is still true, whether or not the institution agrees. Hold on to the proof. Not because you'll necessarily get to use it. Hold on to it because the act of holding it is how you keep yourself true." That was the lesson it had taken 8 years to learn, and she had learned it the only way those lessons got learned. By living it, badly, imperfectly, with long stretches of doubt and a few moments of genuine fear and a lot of Tuesday mornings that were just ordinary Tuesdays, where she did her job and kept her head down and refused to disappear in the way they had intended her to disappear. She had not disappeared. She was still here. On a Thursday morning in late spring, Maya Reyes arrived at Crestwood Animal Trauma Center at 6:40 a.m., which was slightly later than she used to arrive because she had recently started running in the mornings, and the run took time. She clocked in, changed into her scrubs, and stood for a moment at the door of the recovery ward, looking at the row of animals doing the ordinary necessary work of healing. A dog with a repaired ACL. A cat recovering from abdominal surgery. 2 boarding cases, one of which was an elderly Labrador whose owner had been calling every 4 hours to check on him, which the overnight staff found maddening, and which Maya found not charming exactly, but honest. The honest weight of caring about something you couldn't fully protect. She started her rounds. Darlene stopped her at the nurse's station with a message that had come in through the hospital's official channel. "DoD Liaison Office," Darlene said. "They want to schedule a call about expanding the framework to a second regional network. 12 hospitals. Tell them I'm available Tuesday or Thursday," Maya said. "Also, Dr. Vale wants to talk to you about co-authoring something, a paper, on the modified assessment protocol for high-stress K9 trauma cases. I'll find him after morning rounds. Also," Darlene paused, and there was something in the pause that was different from the administrative quality of the previous items. "There's a package at the front desk, no return address, Oregon postmark." Maya went to the front desk. The package was small, padded envelope, her name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was a photograph. Titan, mid-trot, in what looked like an open field, ears forward, tail up, moving with the ease of an animal that had recovered something fundamental. On the back, in the same handwriting, "He ran today. First time since retirement. Pruitt." She stood at the front desk looking at the photograph for a moment. Then she put it in her jacket pocket, close to her. She went back to work. The morning ran the way mornings ran. Fast, necessary, imperfect in the small ways that real work was imperfect. She got a diagnosis right before the attending vet got to it and didn't say so. She caught a medication dosage error in a technician's notes and corrected it quietly. She spent 12 minutes with an animal that was frightened rather than sick, because sometimes that was what the work required, and the 12 minutes were not wasted. She was not the person they had thought she was. 4 years ago when she clocked in for the first time and was handed the clipboard and the jobs nobody wanted. She had never been that person. But she had done those jobs, and she had done them well, and somewhere in the long flat middle of the years that had felt like hiding, she had understood something that she carried now with more clarity than she'd carried anything in a long time. Being unseen is not the same as being nothing. The work you do when no one is watching is still the work. The knowledge you maintain when there's no one to validate it is still knowledge. The truth you hold in a locked box under a bed in a rental house in a city where no one knows who you are is still the truth. They had tried to erase her and they had failed, not because she was exceptional in the way that stories usually required someone to be exceptional, but because she had refused to cooperate with the erasure. She had stayed. She had worked. She had kept the documents and kept the knowledge and kept her own counsel and waited, without certainty, for a dog in pain to walk through a door and remind the world that the person they had written off was still exactly what she had always been. Some kinds of strength don't announce themselves. They wait. And when the moment comes, they step forward, and the dangerous thing goes quiet, and everyone finally looks up from their fear long enough to see what was standing in the room with them the whole time. Maya Reyes clocked in for her shift and took her clipboard and went to work, and the morning moved, and she was in it, and she was exactly where she had earned the right to be.